A grieving widow quietly gives up her seat to an elderly man on a crowded bus, not realizing the CEO sitting inches away had been searching for a woman with a heart like hers. And in that moment, he fell in love. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The rain poured mercilessly over the city, transforming the usually bustling streets into glistening rivers of rushing water. Eliza Parker stood at the bus stop, her black umbrella barely shielding her from the slanting rain. At 45, the lines around her eyes had deepened, not just from age but from the weight of loss she'd carried for the past 3 years. 3 years since Michael's heart had given out unexpectedly one Sunday morning while they were planning their 20th anniversary trip. 3 years of learning to navigate a world that suddenly felt too large, too empty, and painfully indifferent to her grief. The number 67 bus finally appeared through the curtain of rain, its headlights cutting through the gloom of the late afternoon. Eliza closed her umbrella, shaking off the excess water before climbing aboard. The bus was unusually crowded for a Wednesday, probably due to the downpour that had sent everyone seeking shelter. She paid her fare and moved down the aisle, scanning for an empty seat. There was only one left, next to a man in an expensive-looking gray suit who was engrossed in something on his phone. Eliza settled into the seat beside him, careful not to disturb his space. She placed her damp umbrella between her feet and reached into her bag for the novel she'd been reading, a romance that her book club had chosen. It was the type of story she would have scoffed at before, but now these fictional happy endings provided a comforting escape from her own unfinished story. At the next stop, an elderly man boarded, his movements slow and deliberate. His weathered face bore the map of a long life, lines etched deeply around kind eyes that surveyed the full bus with resignation. He gripped the overhead rail with one gnarled hand while the other clutched a cane that looked as ancient as he did. The bus lurched forward, and the old man staggered slightly. Without hesitation, Eliza closed her book. "Sir," she called out, already gathering her things, "please, take my seat." The elderly man looked at her with genuine surprise, as if such courtesy was rare. He began to shake his head, his mouth forming what was surely a polite refusal, but Eliza was already standing. "I insist," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm getting off soon anyway." It wasn't true, but the lie came easily in service of kindness. The elderly man's weathered face creased into a smile of gratitude as he made his way to her vacated seat. "God bless you, young lady," he said, his voice carrying the slight tremor of age. "There aren't many like you left in this world." Eliza smiled back, a genuine smile that momentarily lifted the perpetual sadness from her eyes. "It's nothing," she replied, now holding on to the same rail the old man had gripped moments before. She returned to her book, though standing made reading more challenging as the bus swayed through the rain-slicked streets. What Eliza didn't notice was that the man in the expensive suit had looked up from his phone when she'd offered her seat. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, had followed her movements with sudden interest, his expression shifting from distraction to curiosity. James Harrington, CEO of Harrington Enterprises, had been in the middle of reviewing quarterly reports when the simple act of kindness had pulled his attention away from profit margins and shareholders' expectations. For the past 6 months, James had been conducting a peculiar search. At 50, after building a business empire worth billions, he had come to realize that his wealth meant nothing without someone to share it with. But finding a genuine connection had proven impossible in his world of corporate sharks and social climbers. Every woman he met seemed more interested in his bank account than in who he was as a person. So he'd devised what his friends had called a ridiculous plan: to find someone outside his usual social circles, someone who showed genuine kindness without any expectation of reward. He'd been riding public transportation, something he hadn't done since college, hoping to observe people in their natural environment, away from the influence of his wealth and status. After weeks of disappointing observations of people engrossed in their phones or deliberately avoiding interaction, he'd nearly given up. But now, watching Eliza standing there, absorbed in her book despite the discomfort, James felt a flutter of interest he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just her act of kindness. It was the understated grace with which she'd done it, expecting nothing in return. Even the way she now stood, swaying slightly with the motion of the bus, occasionally glancing up to check the stops, spoke of a quiet dignity he found immensely appealing. The bus hit a pothole, causing everyone to lurch. Eliza lost her balance momentarily, her book tumbling from her hands. Without thinking, James reached out and caught it before it hit the floor. Their eyes met as he handed it back to her. "Thank you," she said, a hint of color touching her cheeks. "My pleasure," James replied, his voice warm. "Jane Austen?" he added, noticing the cover. Eliza looked surprised. "Yes, Persuasion. Have you read it?" "A long time ago," he admitted, "though I remember thinking Captain Wentworth's letter was one of the most romantic things I'd ever read." Her eyes widened slightly, not expecting a man in a business suit to be familiar with Austen's work, much less to have an opinion on it. "It is rather wonderful," she agreed, a small smile playing at her lips. "You pierce my soul. I am half agony, half hope." "Tell me not that I am too late," James continued the quote, his eyes never leaving hers. For a moment, they were connected by the shared appreciation of words written 2 centuries ago. Then the bus jerked to another stop, breaking the spell. Eliza glanced out the window and realized they were approaching her stop. "This is me," she said, feeling an unexpected reluctance to leave. "Thank you again for saving my book." "Anytime," James replied, watching as she maneuvered toward the exit. He made a split-second decision. "Actually, would you—" But his words were lost in the noise of the bus and the shuffle of passengers. Eliza stepped off into the rain, quickly opening her umbrella. Through the streaming windows, James watched her walk away, her figure growing smaller in the distance. He suddenly realized he didn't even know her name. Eliza hurried down the wet sidewalk toward her modest apartment building. The encounter with the man on the bus lingered in her mind. There had been something in his eyes, intelligence, warmth, and perhaps a loneliness that mirrored her own. For the first time in 3 years, she'd felt a spark of connection with someone. But like so many moments in life, it had come and gone in an instant, leaving only a faint impression like raindrops on water. James remained on the bus long past his intended stop, lost in thought. His driver and security team would be wondering where he was, but he couldn't bring himself to care. He kept replaying the brief exchange in his mind. There had been no recognition in her eyes, no indication that she knew who he was. Her kindness to the elderly man had been genuine, her surprise at his knowledge of Austen unfeigned. She was exactly the kind of person he'd been looking for, and he'd let her walk away. The following day dawned clear and bright, as if the previous day's downpour had washed the city clean. Eliza followed her usual routine, a quick breakfast, a check of her emails for freelance editing projects, and then a walk to the local library where she worked part-time in the children's section. Her life had settled into a predictable pattern after Michael's death, not unhappy exactly, but muted, as if all the colors had been turned down. She took the same bus, half hoping to see the man from yesterday, but the seat where he had sat was occupied by a teenager with headphones. Eliza scolded herself for the disappointment she felt. It had been a brief moment, nothing more. People crossed paths every day in the city without it meaning anything. At the library, she lost herself in the familiar comfort of books and the enthusiasm of the children who came for story time. It wasn't until her lunch break that her thoughts returned to the man on the bus and their shared moment over Jane Austen. Meanwhile, across town in his penthouse office with its panoramic view of the city, James Harrington was distracted. His assistant, Margaret, had to repeat herself twice during their morning briefing. "I'm sorry, Margaret," he said finally. "I'm not quite myself today." Clearly, she replied with the frankness of someone who had worked with him for 15 years. "Does this have anything to do with your mysterious bus rides?" James looked up, surprised. "How did you—" "Please," Margaret interrupted with a hint of amusement. "Do you think I don't know when you dismiss your driver and disappear for hours? I've been your assistant long enough to notice when you're up to something." James smiled ruefully. "I met someone," he admitted. "Or rather, I saw someone. A woman on the bus yesterday. She gave up her seat to an elderly man without a second thought, and then we talked about Jane Austen of all things." "Jane Austen?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "She was reading Persuasion," James explained, feeling slightly defensive. "I recognized it. And this mystery woman, did you get her name? Her number?" James's expression fell. "No, she got off the bus before I could ask. I don't know anything about her except that she reads classic literature and has the kindest eyes I've ever seen." Margaret studied her boss with a mixture of amusement and concern. In all the years she'd worked for him, she'd never seen him so affected by a brief encounter. "So what are you going to do about it?" "What can I do?" James ran a hand through his silver-streaked dark hair. "It's a city of millions. The chances of finding her again are—" "Since when has James Harrington been deterred by odds?" Margaret challenged. "You built an empire from nothing. Surely you can find one woman in one city." Her words struck a chord. James straightened in his chair, his mind already calculating possibilities. "The bus," he said. "The number 67. She might take it regularly, and she had a library book. If I could figure out which branch—" "Now that sounds more like the James I know," Margaret smiled. "Should I clear your afternoon schedule?" James checked his watch. "No, I have that meeting with the board that I can't reschedule, but tomorrow I'm going bus riding." For the next week, James rode the number 67 bus at various times of day, hoping to encounter Eliza again. He wore casual clothes to blend in, though his idea of casual still involved designer labels. Despite his efforts, there was no sign of the woman who had captured his attention so completely. Eliza, unaware of the search being conducted for her, continued her quiet life. She took different buses that week due to a schedule change at the library, missing James's careful surveillance by mere coincidence. The memory of their brief connection faded slightly under the demands of daily life, though occasionally she would find herself looking for him when she rode the 67 bus. It was on a particularly busy Friday evening, when Eliza was hurrying to catch the last bus after a late shift at the library, that fate intervened. The bus was pulling away as she reached the stop, and she felt a moment of despair at the thought of waiting another 30 minutes for the next one. But then the bus suddenly slowed and stopped. The doors opened, and there stood the elderly man to whom she had given her seat the week before. "Driver," he had called out, "wait for the young lady." Breathless, Eliza climbed aboard. "Thank you," she said to both the driver and the elderly gentleman. "I don't know if you remember me, but—" "Of course I remember you," the old man smiled. "Kindness leaves an impression, my dear. I'm Harold, by the way." "Eliza," she replied, returning his smile. "Eliza Parker." From his seat at the back of the bus, James Harrington looked up at the sound of her voice, hardly daring to believe his luck. After a week of searching, there she was, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights of the bus, more beautiful than he remembered. James's heart quickened as he watched Eliza thank the elderly man. Harold, she had called him. She hadn't noticed James yet, sitting in the back of the bus in his deliberate attempt to remain inconspicuous. For a moment, he hesitated. What if she thought he was stalking her? What if their brief connection had meant nothing to her? But then he remembered Margaret's words. Since when had James Harrington been deterred by odds? He stood up and made his way forward, holding onto the handrails as the bus lurched into motion. Eliza was chatting amicably with Harold, a warm smile lighting up her face. It struck James how different she looked from the women he usually encountered at charity galas and corporate events. There was no artifice to her, no carefully constructed persona. She was simply herself, and it was refreshing. "Excuse me," James said, his voice causing both Eliza and Harold to look up. "I believe we've met before." Recognition dawned in Eliza's eyes, followed by surprise and something else, pleasure. "The Jane Austen fan," she said with a small smile. "I was wondering if I'd see you again." James felt an absurd surge of joy at the idea that she had thought about him too. "I was hoping for the same," he admitted. "I'm James, by the way, James Harrington." "Eliza Parker," she replied, extending her hand. Her grip was firm and warm. Harold looked between them with the knowing smile of someone who had witnessed many such encounters in his long life. "You two know each other?" he asked. "We met briefly last week," Eliza explained, "when I gave you my seat." "Ah." Harold nodded, his eyes twinkling. "Then I'm responsible for your meeting. I should charge a matchmaker's fee." Eliza blushed, but James laughed good-naturedly. "I think I could manage that, sir," he said, reaching into his pocket for his wallet. Harold waved him off. "I'm joking, young man, though I wouldn't say no to a cup of coffee sometime." "Consider it done," James promised, then turned back to Eliza. "Actually, I was wondering if I could buy you a cup of coffee too. Or dinner, perhaps?" The directness of his invitation caught Eliza off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked her out that she wasn't sure how to respond. I'm sorry," James backtracked, misinterpreting her hesitation. "That was too forward. We've barely met." "No, it's not that," Eliza assured him. "It's just, I haven't done this in a while. Dating, I mean." She twisted the wedding ring she still wore, a nervous habit she'd developed. "My husband passed away 3 years ago." James's expression softened with understanding. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Eliza." "Thank you," she said quietly. There was no pity in his eyes, just genuine empathy, and she appreciated that more than he could know. "And yes, I think I would like to have coffee with you." The smile that spread across James's face was boyish in its enthusiasm. "Wonderful. When would be convenient for you?" They exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet the following afternoon at a cafe near the library where Eliza worked. As they talked, the bus continued its route through the city, the wheels splashing through puddles left over from the previous day's rain. Harold occasionally interjected with witty comments that made them both laugh, his presence easing any awkwardness that might have arisen. When it came time for Eliza to get off at her stop, James stood too. "I'll walk you home," he offered, "if that's all right." Eliza hesitated only briefly before nodding. "That would be nice. Thank you." They said goodbye to Harold, who winked at Eliza in a conspiratorial way that made her chuckle. The night air was cool and fresh as they stepped off the bus, the streets glistening under the streetlights. "I hope you don't think this is strange," James said as they walked side by side. "My being on the same bus again." Eliza glanced at him, curious. "Is it a coincidence?" James considered lying but decided against it. "Not entirely," he admitted. "I was hoping to see you again. I've been riding that bus all week." Instead of being alarmed, Eliza found herself touched by his persistence. "That's actually quite flattering, though you must have better things to do with your time." "Not really," James shrugged, "just running a multinational corporation." Eliza laughed, thinking he was joking, but something in his expression made her pause. "Wait, are you serious?" James nodded, somewhat reluctantly. He had enjoyed these few minutes of being just James, not James Harrington, CEO. "I'm the head of Harrington Enterprises," he said, watching her face carefully for the change that usually came when people learned who he was, the sudden calculation, the shift in behavior. But Eliza merely looked thoughtful. "Harrington, the company that's renovating the old waterfront area?" "Among other things, yes," James confirmed. "I read about that project. They're including a new public library, aren't they?" James nodded, surprised and pleased by her focus. Yes, that was my idea actually. Libraries were a sanctuary for me as a child. For me too, Eliza said softly. That's why I work in one now, though it wasn't my original career plan. What was? James asked, genuinely interested. I was a book editor before. Before Michael died, Eliza explained. I still do freelance work, but I needed something more stable after, and I've always loved being around books and children. They had reached her apartment building, a modest but well-maintained structure in a quiet neighborhood. This is me, Eliza said, stopping at the entrance. James looked up at the building, noting its simplicity. It was a stark contrast to the luxury penthouse where he lived, but there was something inviting about it, something genuine, just like its inhabitant. Thank you for walking me home, Eliza said, feeling suddenly shy. It was my pleasure, James replied sincerely. I'll see you tomorrow, 2 o'clock at the Reading Room Cafe. Eliza nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. I'll be there. As she turned to go inside, James impulsively reached for her hand. Eliza, he said, his voice low. I'm really glad Harold made the driver wait for you tonight. Her smile widened, and for a moment, the sadness that usually shadowed her eyes lifted completely. Me too, James. Good night. Good night, Eliza. She entered the building and James stood there for a moment longer, watching as lights came on in what he presumed was her apartment. Then, with a lightness in his step that he hadn't felt in years, he pulled out his phone to call his driver. Eliza leaned against her closed door, her heart beating unusually fast. What had just happened? Had she really agreed to have coffee with a man she barely knew? A man who happened to be a CEO? It seemed surreal, like something out of one of the romance novels she'd been reading lately to escape her grief. She moved through her apartment, turning on lights and shedding her coat and bag. The space was comfortable but modest, filled with bookshelves and mementos from her life with Michael. Their wedding photo still held a place of honor on the mantel, Michael's kind eyes and warm smile frozen in time. Well, this is unexpected, she said aloud to the photograph. After Michael's death, she'd gotten into the habit of talking to him, finding comfort in the one-sided conversations. I met someone, Mike. I don't know if it will go anywhere, but he seems nice. The photo offered no response, just Michael's eternal smile. Eliza sighed and went to prepare for bed, her mind still whirling with thoughts of James Harrington and his surprising persistence in finding her again. The next morning, Eliza woke with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She had a morning shift at the library which would keep her busy until it was time to meet James. As she got ready, she found herself putting more care than usual into her appearance, choosing a blue dress that Michael had always said brought out her eyes, and even applying a light touch of makeup. The library was quiet that morning, allowing her mind to wander repeatedly to her upcoming coffee date. Was it a date, or just a friendly meeting? James had seemed genuinely interested, but part of her couldn't help wondering why a wealthy, presumably eligible CEO would be interested in a middle-aged widow who worked in a library. You seem distracted today, Eliza, observed her colleague Martha, a kind woman in her 60s who had been a support system after Michael's death. Do I? Eliza tried to sound nonchalant as she reshelved a stack of children's books. Martha gave her a knowing look. You've put The Very Hungry Caterpillar in the young adult section, dear. Oh. Eliza quickly retrieved the misplaced book, feeling her cheeks warm. I guess I am a bit distracted. Anything you want to talk about? Martha prompted gently. Eliza hesitated, then decided there was no harm in sharing. I'm meeting someone for coffee after my shift, a man I met on the bus. Martha's eyebrows rose in pleasant surprise. Well, isn't that lovely? Your first date since Michael, Eliza finished for her. Yes, I suppose it is, though I'm not sure if it's really a date. How does that make you feel? Martha asked, ever the sensitive friend. Eliza considered the question seriously. Nervous, she admitted, and a little guilty, if I'm being honest. like I'm betraying Michael somehow. Martha's expression softened with understanding. Michael loved you very much, Eliza. He wouldn't want you to be alone forever. I know that logically, Eliza sighed. But emotions aren't always logical, are they? No, they certainly aren't, Martha agreed. But give yourself permission to enjoy this coffee, whatever it may or may not lead to. You deserve some happiness, dear. Eliza smiled gratefully at her friend, feeling somewhat lightened by the conversation. Martha was right. She should at least allow herself to enjoy the afternoon without overanalyzing it or feeling guilty. The rest of her shift passed quickly, and soon it was time to head to the reading room. The cafe was a cozy spot popular with the library staff, known for its comfortable chairs, excellent coffee, and walls lined with books that customers could read while they enjoyed their beverages. Eliza arrived a few minutes early, her nerves returning as she selected a quiet table by the window. She ordered a latte and tried to calm her racing heart by focusing on the familiar surroundings. The cafe smelled of coffee and freshly baked pastries, the ambient noise of quiet conversations and the espresso machine creating a soothing backdrop. At precisely 2 o'clock, the door opened and James walked in. He had eschewed his business suit for more casual attire. Dark jeans and a light blue button-down shirt that made his eyes seem even more striking. He spotted her immediately, a warm smile spreading across his face as he approached. Eliza, he greeted her, and just the way he said her name, like it was something precious, made her heart skip a beat. You look beautiful. Thank you, she replied, suddenly shy again. You look nice too, different from your bus attire. James chuckled as he took the seat across from her. I thought I'd try to blend in a bit, though I'm not sure I succeeded. The barista just asked if I was that Harrington guy from the magazine. Eliza smiled, finding his self-deprecation charming. Were you? In a magazine, I mean. Forbes last month, he admitted with a slight grimace. Not my idea, believe me. My PR team insisted. The barista approached their table, clearly flustered to be serving someone of James's status. Mr. Harrington, sir, what can I get for you today? It's on the house, of course. That's very kind, but I insist on paying, James replied smoothly. I'll have whatever blend is your favorite, Black. As the barista hurried away, James turned back to Eliza with an apologetic smile. Sorry about that. Is it always like this for you? Eliza asked, genuinely curious. Being recognized everywhere you go? James shrugged. Not always, but often enough. It's why I enjoyed our meeting on the bus so much. You had no idea who I was, and it was refreshing. Well, I still don't really know who you are, Eliza pointed out. I know your name and your job title, but that's about it. Fair enough, James nodded, his blue eyes twinkling. What would you like to know? As the barista returned with James's coffee and a plate of complimentary pastries they hadn't ordered, Eliza considered her question. There were so many things she wanted to ask, but she settled on, what makes James Harrington ride public buses when he could probably afford to buy the bus company? James laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face, making him appear younger and more carefree. That's actually a very good question, he said, his expression turning more thoughtful. The truth is, I was looking for something. Or someone, I suppose. On a city bus? Eliza raised an eyebrow skeptically. I know it sounds strange, James acknowledged. But I've found that wealth has a way of distorting things. People see the money, the status, not the person. I wanted to meet someone who would see me for who I am, not what I have. Eliza studied him over the rim of her coffee cup, intrigued by his honesty. And did you find what you were looking for? James's gaze held hers steadily. I think I might have, he said quietly. When I saw you give up your seat to Harold without a second thought, I saw something genuine in a world that often feels anything but. The intensity of his gaze made Eliza's cheeks warm, and she looked down at her latte. "It was nothing special," she demurred. "Just common courtesy." "But that's exactly it," James insisted. "Common courtesy isn't so common anymore. Your kindness stood out, Eliza. You stood out." Their conversation flowed easily after that, moving from books they had loved to places they had visited, from childhood memories to future aspirations. James spoke of his company's philanthropic endeavors with genuine passion, while Eliza shared stories of the children who came to her reading sessions at the library, their faces lighting up as they discovered the magic of books. Time seemed to slip away unnoticed, and it wasn't until Martha entered the cafe clearly on her way home from the library that Eliza realized they had been talking for nearly 3 hours. "Eliza!" Martha exclaimed, approaching their table with undisguised curiosity. "I thought I might find you here." As Eliza made the introductions, she couldn't help but notice the approving glint in Martha's eye. Her friend chatted briefly with James, her initial surprise at his identity giving way to warm acceptance as she observed how he looked at Eliza. "I should be going," Martha said after a few minutes, giving Eliza a meaningful glance. "Samuel will be wondering where I am. Lovely to meet you, Mr. Harrington." "James, please," he corrected with a smile. "And likewise, Martha." As Martha left, Eliza realized the cafe had begun to fill with the after-work crowd. "I should probably head home too," she said reluctantly. James nodded, though he made no move to stand. "I've enjoyed this afternoon more than any I can remember in a long time," he said, his voice sincere. "Would it be too forward to ask when I might see you again?" Eliza felt a flutter of excitement mixed with trepidation. This was moving quickly, perhaps too quickly. And yet she couldn't deny the connection she felt with James, a connection she had thought she might never feel again after losing Michael. "I'd like that," she said softly, making her decision. "Though I should warn you, my life is quite ordinary compared to yours. I don't attend galas or travel to exotic locations for business meetings." "Ordinary sounds perfect," James replied with a smile that reached his eyes. "Extraordinary, even." Over the next few weeks, Eliza and James settled into a rhythm that felt both exciting and comfortable. They met for coffee again, then dinner at a small Italian restaurant where the owner knew James by name but treated him no differently than any other customer. They walked through the city park on a Sunday afternoon, stopping to listen to a street musician playing violin concertos with surprising skill. Each encounter deepened their connection, revealing new layers of compatibility that neither had expected to find. James found himself enchanted by Eliza's quiet intelligence, her genuine love of literature, and the compassionate way she spoke about the children at the library. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or status. In fact, she seemed slightly uncomfortable when those aspects of his life came up. Instead, she was interested in his ideas, his passions, the projects that meant the most to him personally rather than financially. For Eliza, James was unlike anyone she had ever known. Despite his position and power, there was a vulnerability to him, a loneliness she recognized because she had carried the same weight after Michael's death. When James spoke about his childhood, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to put him through college, his determination to make something of himself so she would never have to struggle again, Eliza saw beyond the polished exterior to the self-made man beneath. They had agreed to meet at the Botanical Gardens on this particular Saturday, a place Eliza had mentioned loving but rarely visiting due to the entrance fee. James had offered to pick her up in his car, but Eliza had gently declined, preferring to meet him there. It was one of the things he appreciated about her, her insistence on maintaining her independence despite the conveniences his wealth could provide. James arrived early, as was his habit in both business and personal matters. He found a bench near the entrance and sat down to wait, watching families and couples stroll by, enjoying the unusually warm autumn day. He was dressed casually again, khakis and a soft gray sweater that Eliza had once commented brought out the blue in his eyes. He smiled at the memory, still slightly amazed that he had reached a point in his life where a woman's casual remark about his appearance could affect his clothing choices. He spotted her approaching from the bus stop, her copper-colored hair catching the sunlight. She wore a simple green dress with a light jacket, a book tucked under her arm as always. The sight of her made his heart quicken in a way that no business deal or corporate victory ever had. "I hope you haven't been waiting long," Eliza said as she reached him, slightly breathless. James stood, resisting the urge to pull her into an embrace. They had not yet crossed that physical boundary, though he found himself increasingly wanting to. "Not at all," he assured her. "I was enjoying the people watching." They entered the gardens, James discreetly handling the admission fee despite Eliza's protest. "Consider it my way of supporting a cultural institution," he told her with a wink that made her laugh and relent. The botanical gardens were a hidden gem in the city, a sprawling oasis of carefully cultivated beauty. They wandered through the rose garden, the Japanese meditation space with its meticulously raked gravel, and the tropical greenhouse where exotic butterflies fluttered freely among vibrant flowers. "What's that book you're carrying?" James asked as they paused to rest on a bench overlooking a small pond where koi fish swam lazily among lily pads. Eliza glanced down at the volume she had been clutching. "Oh, this? It's a poetry collection. I'm helping a small publisher with some editing work, and they sent me a copy of their newest release." She handed it to him. The poet has an incredible voice, observant, tender, but with an edge of something almost savage at times. James leafed through the slim volume, reading a few lines here and there. "I haven't read much poetry since college," he admitted. "My life became consumed with spreadsheets and legal documents instead." "That's a shame," Eliza said softly. "Poetry has a way of distilling emotions and experiences to their essence. It reminds us of what it means to be human." She hesitated, then added, "After Michael died, poetry was one of the things that helped me. Prose felt too expansive for the jagged edges of grief, but poetry somehow contained it, gave it shape." James looked at her with newfound understanding. "Will you read me one from this collection?" Eliza took the book back, her fingers brushing his in a way that sent a current through them both. She turned to a page she had marked and began to read in a clear, gentle voice that carried just far enough for him to hear without disturbing the tranquility around them. The poem spoke of loss and renewal, of finding beauty in unexpected places. As her voice carried the words across the small space between them, James felt something inside him shift and settle, like a key turning in a long-rusted lock. When she finished, they sat in silence for a moment, the poem hanging in the air between them. "Thank you," James said finally, his voice unusually husky. I don't have the right words." Eliza smiled, understanding in her eyes. "Sometimes there aren't right words. That's why we need poetry." On impulse, James reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. Eliza's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed his hand gently, and they sat like that, connected by touch and unspoken emotion, watching the koi fish create ripples in the still water. The moment was broken by the harsh ringtone of James's phone. He grimaced apologetically as he pulled it from his pocket with his free hand. "I'm sorry. I thought I'd turned it off." "It's all right," Eliza assured him, though she withdrew her hand as he checked the caller ID. "It's my assistant," James said, frowning. "I asked her not to call unless it was an emergency." He answered with a terse, "Margaret, what's wrong?" Eliza watched as his expression shifted from annoyance to concern to something resembling resignation. "I understand," he said after listening for a moment. "Text me the details. I'll be there as soon as I can." He ended the call and turned to Eliza, regret evident in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, but I have to go. There's a situation with one of our international projects that requires immediate attention." Eliza nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course, I understand." "I don't think you do," James said. running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I was really looking forward to spending the day with you. This isn't how I wanted things to go." "It's your work, James," Eliza said reasonably. "It's important." "You're important too," he replied with an intensity that surprised them both. Then, more gently, "Let me at least have my driver take you home." Eliza shook her head. "I'll be fine. The bus stop is right outside, and I have my book for company." She held up the poetry collection with a small smile. "Go, handle your emergency. We'll reschedule." James hesitated, clearly torn. "Are you sure?" "Positive," Eliza assured him, though part of her wished he would insist, would choose her over the demands of his corporate empire. He leaned forward and, before either of them could overthink it, pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. "I'll call you tonight," he promised, his lips lingering near her skin for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Then he was gone, striding purposefully toward the exit, his phone already at his ear as he arranged for his driver to pick him up. Eliza watched him go, her hand rising unconsciously to touch the spot on her cheek where his lips had been. Despite her reassurances, she couldn't help feeling a pang of something like foreboding. Their worlds were so different. How long before those differences became too much to bridge? With a sigh, she gathered her things and made her way out of the gardens, the beauty around her suddenly seeming less vibrant without James beside her to share it. Back in her apartment that evening, Eliza tried to focus on her editing work, but her mind kept straying to James. He hadn't called yet, and she wondered if the emergency had turned out to be more complicated than anticipated. Or perhaps a small voice in her head suggested this was the beginning of the end, the moment when reality intruded on their bubble of connection and reminded them of why relationships between people from such different worlds rarely worked out. She was making tea when her doorbell rang. Surprised, she rarely had visitors, especially in the evening. She approached her door cautiously and checked the peephole. James stood there, looking somewhat disheveled, his tie loosened and his hair ruffled as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. Eliza opened the door, unable to hide her surprise. "James? I didn't expect—" "I'm sorry I didn't call first," he interrupted, the words tumbling out as if he'd been rehearsing them. "I was in a meeting that went on forever, and then there were contracts to sign, and by the time I finished I realized I hadn't called you like I promised, and I couldn't stand the thought of just hearing your voice. I needed to see you, to explain in person why I had to leave so abruptly, to make sure you understand that it wasn't because I wanted to go." He finally paused for breath, looking at her with such earnest concern that Eliza felt her earlier doubts melting away. "James," she said softly, "it's okay. You don't have to explain." "But I do," he insisted, "because I don't want you to think that what's happening between us isn't important to me. It is. You are." He was still standing in the hallway, and Eliza suddenly realized how unusual this must look to her neighbors. The well-dressed, obviously wealthy man standing outside her modest apartment, speaking with such intensity. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "I just made tea." James entered, glancing around her apartment with interest rather than judgment. Eliza watched him take in the bookshelves that lined almost every wall, the comfortable but well-worn furniture, the framed photographs that told the story of her life with Michael. She felt a momentary self-consciousness about the simplicity of her home compared to what must be the luxury he was accustomed to. But James seemed completely at ease, gravitating immediately to her bookshelves. "Your collection is impressive," he said admiringly, running his fingers along the spines. "First editions?" "Some," Eliza acknowledged, moving to the kitchen to prepare a second cup of tea. "Michael and I used to hunt for them in second-hand bookshops whenever we traveled. It became a kind of tradition." James nodded, his eyes landing on the wedding photo on the mantel. He studied it for a moment, his expression unreadable. "He looks kind," he said finally, "like someone who would appreciate poetry and hunt for rare books." "He was," Eliza confirmed, returning with 2 steaming mugs. Very kind, and patient, and funny in a quiet way that would sneak up on you. James accepted the tea with a grateful smile. Thank you for sharing that with me, for not hiding him away because I'm here. His perceptiveness touched Eliza deeply. So many people seemed uncomfortable when she mentioned Michael, as if her widowhood was a contagious condition or her continued love for her late husband somehow diminished any new connection she might form. But James understood that Michael was an integral part of who she was, not a chapter to be closed and forgotten. I'm sorry again about today, James said after taking a sip of his tea. The emergency was a construction collapse at one of our development sites in Singapore. No one was seriously hurt, thankfully, but there are legal implications, insurance concerns. It was genuinely something I couldn't delegate. I never doubted that, Eliza assured him. Your work is important, James. It affects people's lives. I would never expect you to neglect that responsibility. But it's not just about responsibility, James admitted, setting down his mug. My work has been my life for so long that the boundaries have blurred. I've never really had anyone who made me want to draw clearer lines between the two. He looked at her intently, and Eliza felt the weight of his unspoken meaning. And now? She asked quietly. Now I find myself sitting in meetings, thinking about poetry and koi fish and the way your eyes crinkle at the corners when you smile, James said, his voice low and earnest. Now I find myself resenting interruptions that take me away from you, even when I know they're important. He moved closer to her on the couch, close enough that she could smell his cologne mingled with the faint scent of the day's stress. I know we haven't known each other long, Eliza, but I feel something with you that I've never felt before. A connection that goes beyond attraction or compatibility. It's as if... He paused, searching for words. As if we recognize each other, Eliza finished for him, understanding perfectly what he was trying to express. As if we've been moving toward this intersection all along. Exactly, James breathed, relieved at her comprehension. He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. I don't want to rush you. I know you're still carrying Michael with you, and I respect that. I just wanted you to know where I stand, that I'm serious about exploring whatever this is between us. Eliza looked down at their joined hands, feeling both exhilarated and terrified by the possibilities opening before her. I'm scared, she admitted. Not just because of Michael, though that's part of it, but also because, James, we come from such different worlds. You run a global corporation. I read stories to children and edit poetry collections. Your face is in magazines. I take the bus to work. And yet here we are, James said simply, finding each other despite all those differences, maybe because of them. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Eliza didn't move, didn't want to move. When his lips met hers, she closed her eyes, allowing herself to be fully present in the moment. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, but deepened as she responded, her free hand moving to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. Worth waiting for, he murmured, and Eliza couldn't help but smile. Yes, she agreed softly. It was. They stayed like that for a moment longer, suspended in the quiet intimacy they had created. Then James straightened, still holding her hand. I should probably go. It's getting late, and you mentioned you have an early shift tomorrow. Eliza nodded, despite the part of her that wanted to ask him to stay. Will I see you tomorrow? She asked as they moved toward the door. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, James promised with a smile that made her heart flip in her chest. After one more kiss, this one briefer but no less meaningful, James departed, and Eliza closed the door behind him, leaning against it as she tried to process everything that had just happened. Her lips still tingled from his kiss, her mind still reeled from his declarations. She glanced over at Michael's photograph, illuminated by the soft lamplight. "I think I might be falling for him, Mike," she whispered. "Is that okay?" The photograph offered no answer, but as Eliza moved around her apartment, turning off lights and preparing for bed, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever complications might arise from the collision of their different worlds, she knew one thing with certainty. What she had found with James was worth exploring, worth fighting for. With that thought warming her heart, she slipped between her sheets and fell into the most restful sleep she had experienced in 3 years. The following Saturday, Eliza stood in front of her closet, surveying its contents with growing dismay. James had invited her to dinner at La Maison, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, where he was meeting his closest friends. "I want them to meet you," he had said, his eyes warm with affection. "They're the closest thing to family I have." The invitation, while touching, had plunged Eliza into a minor crisis. Her wardrobe consisted primarily of practical, comfortable clothes suitable for working at the library or casual outings. Nothing that would blend in at an establishment where reservations were reportedly booked months in advance and the chef had been featured on international cooking shows. With a sigh, she pulled out the only dress that might be appropriate. A simple black cocktail dress she had worn to a publishing industry event years ago. It was classic enough not to look dated, but she worried it might still be too understated for the occasion. She laid it on the bed and reached for her phone. "Martha, I need fashion advice," she admitted when her friend answered. 20 minutes later, Martha was in her apartment examining the dress with a critical eye. "It's perfectly lovely," she assured Eliza, "but it could use some accessories to elevate it. Fortunately, I came prepared." She opened her large handbag and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "These were my mother's, but I think they'll suit you perfectly tonight." Inside the pouch was a delicate pearl necklace with matching earrings. "Martha, I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," Martha interrupted firmly. "They've been sitting in my jewelry box for years. Mom would have loved knowing they were being worn for a special evening." Her eyes twinkled. "Especially a special evening with a handsome CEO." Eliza accepted the pearls with a grateful smile. "You're a lifesaver." "Now," Martha continued briskly, "shoes, handbag, and most importantly, your mindset. Remember, Eliza, you're not just the widow who works at the library. You're a highly educated woman with excellent taste in literature, a kind heart, and apparently enough charm to captivate one of the most eligible bachelors in the city. These friends of his should be honored to meet you." Eliza laughed, feeling her anxiety ease somewhat. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Martha." "Probably wear sensible shoes to a 5-star restaurant," Martha teased, eyeing Eliza's comfortable flats with mock horror. "Now, what do you have in heels?" By the time James's driver arrived to pick her up, a concession Eliza had finally made after realizing how difficult parking would be near the restaurant, she felt as prepared as she could be. The pearls gleamed softly against her skin, complementing the simple lines of the dress. Martha had helped style her hair in an elegant updo, and a touch of makeup enhanced her natural features without feeling overdone. The car that pulled up was not the ostentatious limousine she had half feared, but a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. The driver, a middle-aged man with a kind face, introduced himself as Richard and held the door open for her with old-fashioned courtesy. "Mr. Harrington is meeting you at the restaurant, Ms. Parker," he explained as she settled into the plush leather seat. "He asked me to apologize for not picking you up himself. A meeting ran long, but he's on his way now." The restaurant was even more intimidating up close. A converted historic mansion with ornate architecture and a red carpet leading to the entrance. A doorman in an impeccable uniform opened the car door when they arrived, and Richard gave her a reassuring smile as she emerged. "Enjoy your evening, Ms. Parker." Eliza took a deep breath and approached the entrance, where a host in formal attire greeted her. "Good evening, madam. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm meeting James Harrington," she said, pleased that her voice sounded steadier than she felt. The host's demeanor shifted instantly from polite professionalism to eager deference. "Of course, Ms. Parker. Mr. Harrington's guests have already arrived. Please, follow me." As they walked through the restaurant, Eliza tried not to gawk at the opulent surroundings. Crystal chandeliers, original artwork on the walls, tables spaced far enough apart to ensure privacy for the well-heeled diners. The host led her to a private dining room at the back, where 3 people were already seated around a beautifully set table sipping champagne. "Ms. Parker has arrived," the host announced, holding the door for her. All 3 heads turned in her direction, and Eliza felt a moment of intense scrutiny as James's friends assessed her. There were 2 men and 1 woman, all approximately James's age, all exuding the same aura of wealth and confidence that he possessed. The woman was the first to rise, approaching Eliza with a warm smile that immediately put her at ease. "You must be Eliza. I'm Charlotte Wilson, James's oldest friend and occasional conscience." She was tall and elegant in a designer dress, her dark hair styled in a sophisticated bob. "He's been absolutely insufferable talking about you, so I'm delighted to finally put a face to the name." "Oh, has he?" Eliza asked, both embarrassed and pleased. "Absolutely smitten," confirmed one of the men coming to join them. He was shorter than Charlotte, with a boyish face that belied his salt-and-pepper hair. "Daniel Chen, college roommate and current technology advisor to Harrington Enterprises. Don't believe a word Charlotte says, by the way. She exaggerates terribly." "Only when it serves a purpose," Charlotte retorted with a grin. The third person approached more slowly, his expression harder to read. "Alexander Brooks," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Legal counsel and reluctant voice of reason in this group." He was the most formally dressed of the 3, his manner reserved but not unfriendly. "It's lovely to meet you all," Eliza said sincerely. "James speaks very highly of you." "And he's told us practically nothing about you," Daniel said, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Just that you met on a bus, of all places, and that you work with books somehow." "I'm a children's librarian," Eliza clarified as she sat down. "And I do freelance editing for small publishers." "How fascinating," Charlotte said, sounding genuinely interested. "My foundation does literacy work in underserved communities. We should talk about potential collaborations." Before Eliza could respond, the door opened again and James strode in, slightly out of breath. "I'm so sorry I'm late," he said, his gaze immediately finding Eliza. The warmth in his eyes as he took in her appearance made her heart flutter. "You look absolutely beautiful," he murmured, bending to kiss her cheek before greeting his friends. "We were just getting acquainted with Eliza," Charlotte informed him, "and wondering why you've been keeping her all to yourself." "Self-preservation," James replied with a smile, taking the seat beside Eliza. "I knew once you met her, you'd like her better than me." The conversation flowed easily after that, aided by excellent wine and the first courses of their meal. Eliza found herself relaxing as she learned more about James's friends and their shared history. They had all met at university. James, Daniel, and Alexander as roommates, Charlotte as the persistent journalism student who kept challenging James in their shared economics class. She cornered me after a debate and informed me that my entire approach to fiscal policy was not only wrong but morally bankrupt, James recalled with affection. I was simultaneously offended and impressed. "And now she makes sure all your charitable giving actually reaches the people who need it," Alexander added. It was clear that these 3 people had been through much with James, the early struggles of starting his business, the meteoric rise of Harrington Enterprises, personal triumphs and setbacks. They shared an easy camaraderie built on decades of trust and mutual respect. Eliza felt both honored to be included in their circle and acutely aware of her outsider status. As the main course was served, a delicate sea base for Eliza that cost more than she usually spent on groceries in a week, Alexander turned the conversation in a more serious direction. "So, James, what's the word on the Westridge acquisition? My team has the preliminary paperwork ready." "Let's not talk business tonight," James suggested, glancing at Eliza. "This is a social occasion." "It's all right," Eliza assured him. "I don't mind." "See? She doesn't mind," Alexander pressed. "And this deadline is coming up fast." James sighed but nodded. "The board is still split. Harrison and his faction are concerned about the environmental implications, which, frankly, I share. The profit potential is significant, but not at the cost of our corporate values." "The remediation could be incorporated into the development plan," Charlotte pointed out. "My environmental consultants have some innovative approaches that might satisfy Harrison." Daniel joined in, discussing technological solutions to minimize the environmental impact, while Alexander outlined the legal ramifications of various approaches. Eliza listened, fascinated by this glimpse into James's world. He was clearly in his element, weighing complex factors with confident authority, yet still considering the human and environmental costs rather than focusing solely on profit. When there was a lull in the discussion, Charlotte turned to Eliza with a knowing smile. "And this is why we rarely get together without work creeping in. I apologize for the boardroom invasion of our dinner." "It's interesting," Eliza said honestly. "The scale of what you all deal with is so different from my world." "Speaking of your world," Daniel interjected, "James mentioned you have a particular interest in children's literacy. My daughter's school is looking for someone to revamp their library program. Would you be interested in consulting?" "Oh," Eliza blinked, surprised by the offer. "I'd be happy to help, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for a consulting role. I just read stories and help children find books they might enjoy." "Don't underestimate your expertise," James said, resting his hand on hers. "You understand what engages young readers in a way that most education consultants don't." "And Daniel's daughter attends West Hill Academy," Charlotte added. "Their resources are considerable." The prestigious private school's name made Eliza's eyebrows rise. "I see. Well, I'd certainly be willing to share my thoughts, though my experience is primarily with public libraries serving diverse communities." "Even better," Daniel nodded approvingly. "Fresh perspective. I'll have my assistant contact you." As the conversation shifted again, Eliza felt James squeeze her hand under the table. "You're doing wonderfully," he whispered. The dinner continued with dessert and coffee, the atmosphere growing more relaxed as the evening progressed. By the time they were preparing to leave, Eliza felt she had gained a much clearer understanding of James's life and the people who mattered most to him. Outside the restaurant, as they waited for their respective vehicles, Charlotte pulled Eliza aside. "I'm glad we finally met," she said warmly. "I haven't seen James this happy in, well, possibly ever." "He's very special," Eliza replied, meaning it. Charlotte's expression turned more serious. "He is, and his life is complicated in ways that can be challenging for relationships. But I think you might be good for him, Eliza Parker." Before Eliza could respond, James appeared at her side. "Are you two conspiring against me?" he asked lightly. "Always," Charlotte replied with a smile, kissing his cheek. "Lovely dinner, James. Don't be a stranger, Eliza." As Charlotte walked toward her waiting car, James turned to Eliza. "So, verdict?" "I like your friends," she said honestly. "They clearly care about you very much." "And they liked you," James assured her, his arm slipping around her waist. "Even Alexander, which is saying something. He usually takes months to warm up to anyone new." James's driver pulled up, and he held the door for Eliza. "May I see you home?" "I'd like that," she replied, sliding into the car. As they drove through the city, James kept hold of her hand, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her skin. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said quietly. "I know it wasn't your usual scene." "It was illuminating," Eliza acknowledged. "Your friends are impressive people." "They're the family I chose," James said. "After my mother died, they became my support system. Their approval means a lot to me, though I would have continued seeing you regardless." Eliza smiled at his determination. "Well, I'm glad I passed muster. though I did feel rather out of my depth at times. "You were perfect," James insisted. "Just being yourself. That's what I—" He broke off, seeming to reconsider his words. "That's what makes you special." They arrived at Eliza's apartment building, and James walked her to her door. In the dim hallway, he pulled her close, one hand cradling her face as he kissed her deeply. Eliza responded with equal fervor, her hands gripping the lapels of his jacket. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Eliza Parker," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "I think I have been since you gave up your seat on that bus." The words hung in the air between them, momentous and irreversible. Eliza's heart raced as she recognized the same feelings growing within her. Yet something held her back from echoing his declaration. Not doubt about her feelings, but fear of the complications their different worlds might bring. "James," she began, uncertainty clear in her voice. He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes, understanding in his gaze. "You don't have to say anything," he assured her. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. No pressure, no expectations." Relief washed over her alongside a rush of affection for this man who seemed to intuitively understand her hesitations. "Thank you," she said softly. "I feel so much. I just need a little time." "Time is something I can give," James promised, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Good night, Eliza." "Good night, James," she replied, watching as he walked back toward the elevator. Only when he had disappeared from view did she enter her apartment, her mind whirling with the events of the evening and the implications of James's declaration. Martha's pearls caught the light as she removed them carefully, placing them back in their velvet pouch. Tonight had been a glimpse into James's world, a world of wealth, influence, and high-stakes decisions. A world very different from her quiet life among books and children's laughter. Could those worlds truly merge? And if they did, would she still recognize herself in the new landscape they created together? The following weeks brought a whirlwind of new experiences for Eliza as James eagerly shared more of his world with her. There was the symphony, where they sat in a private box and he surprised her with his extensive knowledge of classical music. A charity gala where Charlotte served as chairperson, and Eliza wore a borrowed designer dress that made her feel simultaneously elegant and like an imposter. A weekend trip to a vineyard in the countryside where the owner greeted James like an old friend and gave them a personal tour of the cellars. Each new experience was exhilarating in its way, but also increasingly disorienting. Eliza found herself in settings she had never imagined accessing, meeting people whose names she recognized from news headlines, navigating social customs that were foreign to her middle-class upbringing. James was patient and attentive, always checking to ensure she was comfortable, but the stark differences in their worlds became more apparent with each passing day. It was a Tuesday morning at the library, during her weekly story time with the preschoolers, when Eliza felt most acutely the contrast between her life and James's. She sat cross-legged on the colorful carpet, a picture book open on her lap, surrounded by a semicircle of rapt 4-year-olds. She was in the middle of reading Where the Wild Things Are, doing all the voices that made the children giggle with delight when she noticed James standing at the back of the room. He was dressed more casually than usual in dark jeans and a gray sweater, trying to blend in with the parents who had brought their children. But there was something in his posture, in the way he held himself, that set him apart. His smile as he watched her was warm and genuine, full of admiration, yet Eliza couldn't help feeling as if two separate parts of her life had unexpectedly collided. She finished the story, led the children in a simple song about monsters, and then released them to the craft tables where Martha was helping them create their own wild things from paper plates and craft supplies. Only then did she approach James. "This is a surprise," she said, keeping her voice low to avoid disturbing the bustling activity. "A good one, I hope," he replied, bending to kiss her cheek. I was nearby for a meeting and thought I'd see you in your natural habitat." His eyes sparkled with genuine interest. "You're remarkable with them. They were completely spellbound." "Children are an easy audience if you know how to hold their attention," Eliza demurred, though she was pleased by his observation. "Would you like a tour of our humble library?" James nodded eagerly, and Eliza led him through the children's section with its bright murals and miniature furniture, then into the main library with its towering shelves and hushed atmosphere. She pointed out her favorite nooks and the new computer station that had been donated by a local business, a far cry from the state-of-the-art technology that James's company probably considered standard. "It's not much compared to what you're used to," she acknowledged as they completed the circuit, "but it means the world to the people in this community." "I can see that," James said thoughtfully. "And I can see why you love it here." He hesitated, then added, "Actually, I had another reason for stopping by today. I have a proposition for you." Eliza raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh? Daniel's daughter's school is very interested in your consultation. In fact, they're hoping you might consider a more substantial role in revamping their entire literacy program. It would be part-time, allowing you to keep your position here, but—" He looked around the modest library. "The resources you'd have access to would be considerably greater." Eliza blinked, surprised by the offer. I'm flattered, truly, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for something so comprehensive." "You're more qualified than you give yourself credit for," James insisted. "Your understanding of what engages young readers, your passion for literacy, these are exactly what they're looking for. Just think about it. You could make such an impact." His enthusiasm was infectious, and Eliza found herself nodding. "I'll think about it," she promised. "But no pulling strings, James. If they're interested in me, it should be based on my merits, not because of us." "Of course," he agreed quickly. "Though I can't promise Daniel hasn't already sung your praises, he was quite impressed with you at dinner." Martha approached then, greeting James warmly before informing Eliza that she was needed back in the children's section. "Glue crisis," she explained with a wry smile. "Ms. Beatrice looks like she might have a meltdown if you don't intervene." Eliza chuckled, all too familiar with the senior librarian's tendency to become overwhelmed by the controlled chaos of craft time. "I should go," she told James. "Duty calls." He nodded understandingly. "I'll call you tonight? Maybe we could grab dinner after your shift?" "I'd like that," Eliza replied, already moving toward the sounds of childish commotion. As she expertly diffused the craft emergency and helped the children complete their wild things, she couldn't help glancing occasionally toward the library entrance where James had exited. The juxtaposition of him in this space, her space, had left her with a strange mixture of feelings she couldn't quite untangle. That evening, as they sat in a quiet neighborhood bistro, Eliza broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "James, do you ever worry that our worlds are just too different?" He looked up from his pasta, his expression thoughtful. "I'd be lying if I said I hadn't considered it," he admitted. "But I don't think it's an insurmountable issue. Different doesn't have to mean incompatible." "But it's not just about our backgrounds or our jobs," Eliza persisted. "It's about expectations, lifestyles, the spaces we occupy." She twisted her napkin in her lap, struggling to articulate her concerns. "Today, seeing you at the library, it made me realize how separate these parts of my life have been. And I'm not sure how to bridge that gap." James reached across the table to take her hand. "I think we bridge it by doing exactly what we're doing, sharing our worlds with each other, finding the places where they can intersect." "But what if one world begins to overshadow the other?" Eliza asked, giving voice to one of her deepest fears. "I've worked hard to build my life after Michael. I like who I am, what I do. I don't want to lose that." "I would never want you to," James assured her, his voice fervent. "Eliza, what drew me to you was your authenticity, your kindness, your passion for what you do. Why would I want to change any of that? Eliza squeezed his hand, grateful for his understanding. I know you wouldn't intentionally, but your world is so consuming. The galas, the restaurants, the people who treat you with such deference. It would be easy to get lost in all that. James was quiet for a moment, considering her words. Perhaps we've been spending too much time in my world lately, he acknowledged. I've been eager to share it with you, but maybe I've been overwhelming you in the process. It's not that I don't enjoy those experiences, Eliza clarified. It's just that sometimes I feel like an observer rather than a participant, like I'm wearing a costume that doesn't quite fit. Then we should balance things better, James decided. More nights like this, he gestured to the unpretentious bistro around them, and fewer galas. More activities that are meaningful to you. I want to be part of your world as much as I want to share mine with you. His sincerity touched Eliza deeply. I'd like that, she said softly. And I have been thinking about the school consultation. If they're genuinely interested in my ideas, I'd be willing to meet with them. James's face lit up. That's fantastic. I'll let Daniel know. The rest of their dinner passed pleasantly, the tension eased by their honest conversation. When James drove her home later, he walked her to her door as he always did. Their goodnight kiss was tender and lingering, filled with the growing feelings neither could deny despite their concerns. I'm falling in love with you too, Eliza whispered against his lips as they parted. I've been afraid to say it, but it's true. The joy that bloomed on James's face was beautiful to behold. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. You've made me the happiest man in the city tonight, he murmured. Inside her apartment, Eliza leaned against the closed door, her heart full to bursting with conflicting emotions. Love, yes, powerful and undeniable, but also fear, uncertainty about the future, and the lingering question of whether two such different lives could truly become one without fundamental changes to either. 3 days later, Eliza found herself sitting across from the headmistress of West Hill Academy, trying not to be intimidated by the oak-paneled office and the distinguished-looking woman regarding her with keen interest. Your ideas about interactive storytelling and community engagement are quite refreshing, Ms. Parker, Dr. Eleanor Winters said, reviewing the notes she had taken during their discussion. Most of our consultants focus exclusively on technology and measurable outcomes, but your emphasis on fostering a genuine love of reading is exactly what I've been advocating for. Children need both structure and freedom in their relationship with books, Eliza explained, warming to the topic. They need guidance to help them find stories that resonate with them, but also space to discover their own literary tastes. Dr. Winters nodded approvingly. I couldn't agree more. And your experience with diverse communities could help us address some of the blind spots in our current program. She set down her pen decisively. I'd like to offer you the position, Ms. Parker, 2 days a week to start, with the flexibility to maintain your current role at the public library. Eliza blinked, surprised by the swiftness of the offer. That's very generous, Dr. Winters. May I have a few days to consider it? Of course, the headmistress agreed. But I do hope you'll accept. We could implement your first initiatives for the spring semester. As Eliza left the impressive campus, she couldn't help feeling a surge of professional pride. Despite her initial doubts, Dr. Winters had been genuinely interested in her ideas, not just offering her the position as a favor to James or Daniel. The opportunity to impact the reading lives of hundreds of children with resources she could only dream of at the public library was undeniably appealing. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the familiar figure waiting beside a sleek black car at the school gate. Alexander Brooks, James's serious-minded legal advisor, straightened when he spotted her. Ms. Parker, he greeted her formally. I hope you don't mind my meeting you here. I was at the school for a board meeting and thought I might offer you a ride. Eliza hesitated, surprised by the unexpected encounter. That's very kind, but I was planning to take the bus. I insist, Alexander said, opening the passenger door. There are some matters I'd like to discuss with you if you don't mind." Curiosity overcame her reluctance, and Eliza slid into the luxurious car. Alexander joined her, instructing his driver to proceed before turning to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I understand Dr. Winters offered you the consultation position," he began. "News travels fast," Eliza observed, slightly uncomfortable with the idea that her professional meeting was already being discussed. "West Hill is a small community in many ways," Alexander replied smoothly. "I serve on the board of trustees, as does Daniel. It's a natural nexus point for many of our circle." Our circle. The phrase subtly underscored Eliza's outsider status. "I see," she said neutrally. "And what matters did you wish to discuss, Mr. Brooks?" Alexander's direct gaze was unsettling in its intensity. "James is an extremely important person, Ms. Parker, not just to his friends, but to thousands of employees who depend on his leadership, to charitable organizations that rely on his generosity, to business partners who value his vision." "I'm well aware of James's significance," Eliza replied, a hint of coolness entering her voice, "though I confess I'm not sure why you're telling me this." "Because his happiness matters to a great many people," Alexander continued, unperturbed. "And recently, you've become integral to that happiness." Eliza wasn't sure whether to feel flattered or insulted by this assessment. "I care deeply for James," she said carefully. "I don't doubt that," Alexander assured her. "But caring isn't always enough, is it? There are practical considerations. Your worlds are vastly different. The scrutiny that comes with James's position, the expectations, the obligations, these aren't small obstacles." "With all due respect, Mr. Brooks," Eliza said, her patience wearing thin, "these are matters for James and me to navigate." "Of course," Alexander agreed smoothly. "I merely want to ensure you understand what you're stepping into. James is idealistic in many ways. He sees possibilities where others see impracticalities. It's what makes him brilliant in business, but sometimes in personal matters. He let the implication hang in the air between them. Eliza felt a flare of indignation on James's behalf. "I think you underestimate both James's awareness and my own," she said firmly. "We're both adults who understand that relationships require work and compromise." Alexander studied her for a moment, then nodded as if she had passed some test. "Good," he said simply. "That's precisely what I hoped to hear." The car had reached her apartment building. Alexander extended a business card to her as she prepared to exit. "If you ever need anything, advice, assistance, a different perspective, please don't hesitate to call." Eliza accepted the card reflexively, unsure whether she had just been subjected to a warning, a test, or a genuine, if awkwardly expressed offer of support. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Brooks," she said formally. "Alexander, please," he corrected with the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "After all, if you're going to be part of our circle, we should be on a first-name basis." As the car pulled away, Eliza stood on the sidewalk, Alexander's card in her hand and his words echoing in her mind. "Part of our circle." The phrase carried both promise and peril, an invitation and a challenge rolled into one. She entered her building deep in thought, wondering what James would make of this unexpected intervention from his friend, and what it signified about the road ahead of them. The differences in their worlds had just been thrown into sharp relief once again, and Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that her relationship with James was approaching a crossroads neither of them had anticipated. Eliza didn't mention her encounter with Alexander to James. Part of her wanted to, curious about his reaction, but a larger part feared that it might create tension between him and his friend. Instead, she told him about accepting the position at West Hill Academy, a decision she had made after careful consideration. "That's wonderful!" James exclaimed when she shared the news over dinner at her apartment. She had insisted on cooking for him, a simple pasta dish that was one of her specialties. "You're going to make such a difference there." "I hope so," Eliza replied, touched by his enthusiasm, though I'll admit, I'm a bit nervous about working in such a prestigious environment. You'll be brilliant, James assured her, reaching across her small kitchen table to squeeze her hand. Those privileged kids need someone with your perspective, your understanding of how reading can be a lifeline for children from all backgrounds. His confidence in her abilities warmed Eliza's heart. This was one of the things she cherished most about James, his absolute faith in her, his ability to see strengths in her that she sometimes overlooked herself. She had officially started her role at West Hill the previous week, spending 2 days on the expansive campus with its manicured lawns and state-of-the-art facilities. The contrast with her public library couldn't have been starker, but she had found the staff welcoming and the children, regardless of their socioeconomic background, just as hungry for stories that captured their imagination. "Tell me about your day," she prompted, refilling James's wine glass. "Did that merger go through?" "It did," he confirmed with a satisfied smile, "and with better terms than we initially hoped for. The company's technology complements ours perfectly, and their team is innovative, forward-thinking. It's a good match." "That's great," Eliza said sincerely. She had grown more comfortable discussing business matters with James, even finding herself genuinely interested in the challenges and triumphs of his work. "Will there be a lot of restructuring?" "Some, but we're committed to retaining as many jobs as possible. That was a non-negotiable condition for me." He looked thoughtful for a moment. "Actually, there's an event next week to welcome the new team members. A dinner at the Metropolitan Club. I'd love for you to join me." Eliza hesitated briefly. Corporate events still made her somewhat uncomfortable, though she had become more adept at navigating them. "Of course," she agreed, not wanting to disappoint him. "I'll check my schedule at the library, but I'm sure Martha will cover for me if needed." "Wonderful. It's black tie, but don't worry about that. Charlotte mentioned she'd be happy to help you find something appropriate." He seemed to catch himself, noting her expression. "Not that your clothes aren't appropriate. I just meant—" "I know what you meant," Eliza assured him with a gentle smile, though his words had inadvertently touched a nerve. The fact that he assumed she would need help dressing for his world was a subtle reminder of the disparities between them. "I'm sure Charlotte and I can find something suitable." The evening continued pleasantly, transitioning from dinner to relaxed conversation on her couch, James's arm wrapped comfortably around her shoulders as they discussed books they had recently read. These quiet moments in her apartment had become precious to Eliza, instances where the outside world with all its complications fell away, leaving just the two of them in a space where their differences seemed insignificant. The peaceful bubble burst 3 days later when Eliza was at the library, helping a child locate a book about dinosaurs. Martha approached, an unusual expression of concern on her face. "Eliza, dear, you might want to see this," she said quietly, handing over her tablet. The screen displayed a gossip website, and Eliza felt her stomach drop as she saw the headline, "Harrington's New Flame. Who is the Mystery Librarian?" Below it was a photo of her and James entering the reading room cafe, his hand resting protectively at the small of her back, their faces turned toward each other in a moment of private conversation. The article itself was a mixture of conjecture and thinly veiled judgment, questioning what a simple librarian could possibly offer one of the city's most eligible bachelors. It even dragged up her past, mentioning Michael's death and speculating about her financial situation with a callousness that made Eliza's blood run cold. "How did they—" she began, her voice faltering. "I don't know, dear," Martha said sympathetically, "but I thought you should see it before someone else mentioned it." Eliza handed the tablet back, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," she managed, trying to process this intrusion into her private life. "I should call James." She retreated to the staff room, pulling out her phone with a sense of dread. Before she could dial, it rang, James's name appearing on the screen. "I just saw it," she said without preamble when she answered. "I'm so sorry, Eliza." James's voice was tight with anger. This is exactly the kind of vulture journalism I despise. My PR team is already reaching out to have it taken down, but the damage is done, Eliza finished for him, sinking into a chair. James, they mentioned Michael. They talked about his death like it was just a piece of gossip. I know, he said, his tone gentling. It's unforgivable. I promise you we'll address this. Are you okay? Do you want me to come to the library? Eliza took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. No, I'm fine. Just shocked. I never expected this kind of attention. I should have prepared you better, James said regretfully. This is part of my life. Unwanted scrutiny, people making assumptions based on fragments of information. I've gotten used to it over the years, but I should have warned you more explicitly. It's not your fault, Eliza assured him, though part of her did wish she had been more prepared. We knew this was a possibility. There was a brief silence on the line. Eliza, would you consider staying at my place tonight? I don't like the idea of reporters potentially finding your address. The suggestion gave her pause. They had not yet reached that level of intimacy in their relationship, though not for lack of attraction. They had both wanted to proceed carefully, respecting the significance of such a step. I appreciate the concern, she said carefully, but I think I'll be fine at my apartment. It's a secure building, and I doubt I'm interesting enough for them to stake out. You underestimate how persistent these people can be, James warned. But I understand. At least let me send a car for you after work. I can meet you at your place. Bring dinner. This seemed like a reasonable compromise. That would be nice, thank you. After they disconnected, Eliza sat for a moment longer, trying to gather her composure before returning to her duties. The article had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, not just because of the invasion of privacy, but because it had so starkly highlighted the public dimension of James's life, a dimension she had known about intellectually but had not fully appreciated emotionally until now. Throughout the afternoon, she caught colleagues glancing at her with newfound curiosity. A few of the regular library patrons gave her looks of recognition that they hadn't before. It was as if overnight she had transformed from just Eliza the librarian to a person of interest, a curiosity to be examined and discussed. The feeling was profoundly uncomfortable. By the time she left work, Eliza was exhausted from maintaining a professional demeanor while internally processing her new, unwanted public exposure. The sleek black car James had sent was waiting, Richard opening the door with a sympathetic smile that suggested he too was aware of the situation. "Evening, Ms. Parker. Straight to your apartment, as Mr. Harrington requested." "Thank you, Richard," she replied, grateful for his calm, unobtrusive presence. The ride was peaceful, but as they approached her building, Eliza noticed a small cluster of people with cameras near the entrance. Her heart sank. "Are those paparazzi?" Richard confirmed grimly. "Don't worry, Ms. Parker. I'll pull around to the service entrance. Mr. Harrington arranged it with your building manager." True to his word, Richard maneuvered expertly around to a back entrance where James was waiting, his expression a mixture of relief at seeing her and anger at the situation. He helped her from the car and quickly ushered her inside, keeping his body between her and the direction of the street. "I'm so sorry about this," he said once they were safely in the elevator. "It's my fault. I've been too visible with you, too careless." "James, stop," Eliza said firmly. "You haven't done anything wrong. Neither of us has. We're two adults in a relationship. There's nothing scandalous about that." "Of course there isn't," he agreed, his features softening as he looked at her. "But in my world, privacy is a commodity that's hard to come by. I just hate that I've dragged you into this." Inside her apartment, James had indeed arranged for dinner, a spread from one of Eliza's favorite local restaurants, along with a bottle of good wine. He had clearly made an effort to create a sense of normalcy amid the chaos. As they ate, he explained that his PR team had already issued a brief statement confirming their relationship but requesting privacy. "It won't stop the speculation entirely," he warned, "but it might reduce the frenzy a bit." "I hope so," Eliza said, pushing her food around her plate with less appetite than usual. James, I need to ask, is this what it's always going to be like? People with cameras following us, making up stories, invading our privacy? James sighed, setting down his fork. Not always, no. The interest will die down eventually, especially if we don't feed it with drama. But yes, there will always be some level of public scrutiny. It comes with the territory of who I am, the position I hold. Eliza nodded slowly, absorbing this reality. And what about when we go to that corporate dinner next week? Will there be photographers there too? Probably, James admitted. But they'll be official event photographers, not paparazzi. Still, images might make their way to the society pages, social media. I see, Eliza said quietly. Another dimension of his world she had to adjust to. Another way in which her private life would become incrementally less private. James reached across the table, taking her hand. If you're having second thoughts about attending, I completely understand. This has been a lot to process in one day. No, Eliza said with determination. I'm not going to hide or let these people scare me away from supporting you. I just need to adjust my expectations. Relief washed over James's face. Have I told you lately how extraordinary you are? He asked, lifting her hand to his lips. Later, as they sat together on her couch, James's arm around her shoulders, Eliza found herself thinking of Alexander's words about the scrutiny that came with James's position. The man had been right, though she would never give him the satisfaction of admitting it. A penny for your thoughts, James murmured, noticing her silence. Eliza hesitated, then decided to share at least part of what was on her mind. I was thinking about what a strange position we're in. Most couples get to decide for themselves when to go public, how to share their relationship with the world, but we've had that choice taken away from us. We'll take it back, James promised. We'll define this relationship on our terms, not theirs. His confidence was reassuring, but Eliza couldn't quite shake the feeling that they had crossed a threshold today. Their relationship was no longer just their own, it had become in some small way public property, subject to outside opinions and judgment. When James left that night, reluctantly but recognizing that they both needed space to process the day's events, Eliza stood at her window, watching his discreet exit through the service entrance where his driver waited. Even this simple act of parting had become complicated, requiring planning and subterfuge. Her phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. Saw the article. Don't let the vultures get to you. They're just jealous because James chose someone real instead of one of their plastic socialites. Call me if you need anything. X. The message brought a small smile to Eliza's face. Despite her initial wariness, she had grown fond of Charlotte's directness and loyalty. She typed back a quick thanks, appreciating the support. Another text arrived, this one from Martha. Staff and regulars at the library are united in their outrage on your behalf. Mrs. Greenwood says she'll hit any photographer who bothers you with her handbag, and you know she carries that heavy one with the metal clasp. You are loved, dear. This made Eliza laugh out loud, the tension in her chest easing somewhat. Yes, there would be challenges ahead as she and James navigated the public dimension of their relationship. But they also had allies, people who cared about them and would stand by them through the difficulties. As she prepared for bed, Eliza made a decision. She would not allow faceless strangers with cameras to determine the course of her relationship with James. She would not give them that power. Whatever came next, they would face it together, on their own terms. With that resolve firming in her mind, she slipped between her sheets, hoping for dreams unmarred by prying eyes and gossipy headlines. The week following the gossip article was a test of Eliza's resilience. Though the paparazzi presence outside her apartment had diminished after the first 2 days, she still felt eyes on her wherever she went. At the library, a few parents had asked pointed questions about that billionaire she was dating, their curiosity thinly veiled as casual conversation. At West Hill Academy, she had caught whispers among the faculty, quickly silenced when she approached. Through it all, Eliza maintained her composure, focusing on her work with the children who, mercifully, remained oblivious to adult gossip. James had been supportive but also busy with the merger, their time together limited to brief dinners and late-night phone calls. In a way, the forced separation had been a blessing, giving Eliza space to process her new reality without the intensity of his presence. Now, as she stood in Charlotte's expansive dressing room, surrounded by designer gowns Charlotte had called in for her to try, the full weight of the evening ahead settled on her shoulders. The corporate dinner at the Metropolitan Club would be her first official appearance as James's partner since the media exposure. "Stop overthinking, darling," Charlotte said, accurately reading Eliza's expression. "It's just dinner with a bunch of people who care far more about their stock options than who James is dating." "Except they'll all have read that article or ones like it," Eliza replied, running her fingers over the fabric of a midnight blue gown. "They'll be curious, making judgments." "Let them," Charlotte said with a dismissive wave. "Their opinions are irrelevant. What matters is that James adores you, and anyone who knows him can see how happy you've made him." Eliza smiled gratefully at Charlotte, whose friendship had become unexpectedly important to her. Despite their different backgrounds, they shared a love of literature, a direct communication style, and a protective instinct toward James. "Now, this one," Charlotte continued, holding up an emerald green dress with a classic silhouette, "would be absolutely stunning with your coloring. Sophisticated without trying too hard. Perfect for the corporate wife." She stopped abruptly, seeming to realize what she'd said. "Partner! I meant partner!" The slip hung in the air between them, its implications impossible to ignore. Corporate wife. Was that what she was auditioning for? The thought both thrilled and terrified Eliza. "Let me try it on," she said, deliberately sidestepping the awkward moment. The dress fit beautifully, the rich color complementing her copper hair and fair skin. As Charlotte helped with the zipper, Eliza studied her reflection, barely recognizing the elegant woman looking back at her. It wasn't just the dress. There was something different in her eyes, a new awareness, perhaps even a new confidence. "You look magnificent," Charlotte declared. "James won't be able to take his eyes off you." "Thank you for this," Eliza said sincerely. "Not just the dress, but everything. Your friendship, your guidance. It means a lot." Charlotte squeezed her shoulder gently. "That's what friends are for. And between us, you're the best thing that's happened to James in a long time. The first woman who sees him, not his bank account." When James picked her up that evening, his reaction to the dress was everything Charlotte had predicted. His eyes widened, a soft wow escaping his lips before he composed himself enough to speak properly. "You look absolutely beautiful," he said, taking her hand and spinning her gently to appreciate the full effect. "Green is definitely your color." "You clean up pretty nicely yourself," Eliza replied, admiring how handsome he looked in his tuxedo. Despite the weeks they had been dating, moments like these still had the power to leave her slightly breathless. The Metropolitan Club was even more imposing than Eliza had imagined. A historic building with soaring ceilings, marble columns, and an atmosphere that practically whispered of old money and power. As they entered the grand ballroom, Eliza felt the subtle shift in energy, heads turning to observe James Harrington and his now-known librarian girlfriend. James's hand pressed reassuringly at the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd, stopping frequently to introduce her to colleagues, board members, and business partners. Eliza had prepared for this, researching the merger and the company they were acquiring, ready with thoughtful questions and observations that surprised many of James's associates. "Ms. Parker, James mentioned you work with literacy programs," said an older gentleman James had introduced as a key investor. "My foundation has been looking to expand its educational initiatives. Perhaps we could discuss potential collaborations." "I'd be delighted," Eliza replied, genuinely interested. I've found that combining resources between public and private institutions can create particularly effective programs. James beamed at her with undisguised pride as she navigated these conversations with growing confidence. His thumb traced small circles on her back, a subtle gesture of support and affection that grounded her throughout the evening. Dinner was served at elaborately decorated tables, each seating 10 guests. James and Eliza were placed at the head table with the most senior executives from both companies. The conversation flowed from business to politics to art, with occasional personal questions directed at Eliza, which she fielded with as much grace as possible. "So, Ms. Parker," said the wife of the acquired company's CEO, a perfectly coiffed woman with shrewd eyes, "how does someone who works in a public library meet James Harrington? It seems like quite the fairy tale." There was a subtle emphasis on public library that made the question feel like more than innocent curiosity. Eliza took a sip of her wine, aware of several pairs of eyes on her. "Actually, I gave up my seat to an elderly gentleman on the bus," she said truthfully. "James was sitting nearby. We started talking about Jane Austen of all things." "The bus?" the woman repeated, her eyebrows rising. "How charming." "I find public transportation quite democratic," James interjected smoothly. "You meet all sorts of interesting people, including occasionally someone who changes your life." His gaze on Eliza was warm, a public declaration of his feelings that made her cheeks flush. The conversation moved on, but Eliza could still feel the woman's assessing gaze. It wasn't hostile exactly, more calculating, as if trying to determine whether Eliza was a temporary diversion or a serious contender for a permanent place in James's life. After dinner came speeches, James delivering a charismatic address about the future of the merged companies that had the room hanging on his every word. Eliza watched him with a mixture of pride and fascination. This was a side of him she rarely saw, the commanding CEO, the visionary businessman whose decisions affected thousands of lives. He was magnetic, confident without being arrogant, passionate about his company's mission in a way that made even dry corporate jargon sound inspiring. As the formal part of the evening concluded and the gathering transitioned to cocktails and networking, Eliza found herself momentarily alone while James was deep in conversation with the CEO of the acquired company. She took the opportunity to slip away to the ladies' room, needing a brief moment of solitude to gather her thoughts. Standing before the ornate mirror, adjusting a strand of hair that had come loose, Eliza didn't immediately notice the woman who emerged from one of the stalls behind her. It was only when she spoke that Eliza recognized her. Vanessa Carmichael, James's former fiancée whose engagement had ended 2 years earlier, according to a detail in the gossip article Eliza had tried to forget. "So you're the librarian," Vanessa said, her tone neither friendly nor overtly hostile as she washed her hands at the sink beside Eliza. "I've been curious to meet you." Eliza turned, maintaining her composure despite the unexpected encounter. "Eliza Parker," she introduced herself, offering her hand. Vanessa dried her hands before accepting the handshake, her grip firm and cool. "Vanessa Carmichael, but I think you know that already." She was strikingly beautiful, with the kind of polished sophistication that came from a lifetime of privilege and the best finishing schools. "You've caused quite the stir in certain circles." "I wasn't aware I had that much influence," Eliza replied evenly. Vanessa smiled, a practiced expression that didn't reach her eyes. "James Harrington dating a librarian? Trust me, it's the most interesting gossip the country club has had in months." She reached into her clutch for a lipstick, applying it with precision. "You seem nice, Ms. Parker, different from his usual type." "I wasn't aware he had a type," Eliza said, increasingly uncomfortable with the conversation but unwilling to show weakness. "Oh, he does. Or did." Vanessa capped her lipstick, studying her reflection with critical eyes. "Ambitious, connected, familiar with his world. Women who understand the demands of his position, the expectations." She turned to face Eliza directly. It's not an easy role being with someone like James. The scrutiny never really ends. The demands on your time, your privacy, your identity, they're constant. Eliza felt a chill at the accuracy of this assessment. Are you speaking from personal experience? 2 years of my life, Vanessa confirmed with a slight shrug. I thought I knew what I was getting into. I was raised in this world after all. But even I underestimated how much of myself I'd have to sacrifice to fit into the future James had planned. James has never asked me to sacrifice anything, Eliza said firmly. Not yet, Vanessa replied, her tone almost sympathetic. But he will. Not intentionally, perhaps, but inevitably. His world has gravity, Miss Parker. It pulls everything into its orbit and transforms it to suit its needs. She checked her appearance one final time before heading toward the door. Just something to consider. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Eliza remained in the restroom for a moment after Vanessa left, trying to shake off the unsettling encounter. Was Vanessa trying to warn her or simply attempting to create doubt? Either way, her words had hit uncomfortably close to the concerns Eliza herself had been harboring. When she returned to the ballroom, she spotted James immediately, his head bent in conversation with Alexander. Something in their posture, the tension in James's shoulders, the tight set of Alexander's jaw, suggested the discussion wasn't entirely pleasant. As she approached, she caught the tail end of Alexander's statement. Need to consider the board's perspective. This sort of distraction right before the London expansion. He broke off as he noticed Eliza, his expression smoothing into polite neutrality. Ms. Parker, you look lovely this evening. Thank you, Alexander, she replied, looking between the two men with concern. Is everything all right? Perfectly fine, James assured her, though the strain around his eyes suggested otherwise. Just a small difference of opinion on a business matter. He placed his hand at the small of her back, a gesture that had become familiar and comforting. Are you enjoying yourself? It's been interesting, Eliza said diplomatically, deciding not to mention her encounter with Vanessa just yet. Your speech was impressive. I could see why everyone holds you in such high regard. James's expression softened at her praise. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. Alexander excused himself to speak with another colleague, leaving them momentarily alone amid the crowded room. James used the opportunity to guide Eliza toward a quieter corner. I'm sorry if this evening has been overwhelming, he said, his voice low enough for only her to hear. I know it's a lot. The scrutiny, the questions, the politics. It's all right, Eliza assured him. It's part of your world, and I want to understand every aspect of your life. James studied her face, as if searching for signs of insincerity or strain. You're remarkable, you know that? Most people would be running for the hills after the week you've had. I'm made of sterner stuff, she replied with a small smile. Though I did have an interesting conversation in the ladies' room with Vanessa Carmichael. James's expression tightened. Vanessa is here? I had no idea she was invited. She had some insights to share about dating James Harrington. I can imagine, James said grimly. Eliza, whatever she said, it doesn't matter, Eliza interrupted gently. What matters is what's between us, not someone else's interpretation of it. Relief washed over his features, followed by something deeper, more profound. Have I told you that I love you? He asked softly. The words, though they had been implied in countless ways over the previous weeks, had not been spoken aloud since that night at her apartment door. Hearing them now in this crowded room that represented so much of what intimidated her about his world felt like an anchor in choppy waters. Not in so many words, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Then I've been remiss, James said, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made the rest of the room fade away. I love you, Eliza Parker, not for how you fit or don't fit into this world. He gestured subtly at their surroundings, but for who you are. Your kindness, your intelligence, Your quiet strength. The way you see me, not my position or my wealth. Eliza felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, emotion welling up unexpectedly. I love you too, she said, the words feeling both momentous and perfectly natural, though I'm still figuring out how to navigate all this. We'll figure it out together, James promised, brushing his thumb gently across her cheek. Partners, equals, finding our way. The moment was interrupted by the approach of another executive eager to speak with James. As the conversation shifted back to business matters, Eliza found herself observing James in his element, confident, articulate, completely in command of the complex details under discussion. Despite the challenges of the evening, despite Vanessa's warning and Alexander's apparent concerns, Eliza felt a growing certainty in her heart. She loved this man, not despite the complications his world presented, but as a complete package. The brilliant CEO and the thoughtful person who quoted Jane Austen and valued kindness above all else. Whatever obstacles lay ahead, they would face them together. It wouldn't be easy merging their different worlds into a shared life, but tonight had shown her it was possible. She could stand in this rarefied air and remain true to herself, could love James Harrington without becoming a mere accessory to his powerful persona. As the evening drew to a close and they prepared to leave, James kept her close, his hand warm against hers, a physical manifestation of the connection they had forged against unlikely odds. The looks they received, curious, assessing, occasionally envious, no longer bothered Eliza quite as much. Let them look, she thought. Let them wonder what brought the CEO and the librarian together. She and James knew the truth, and ultimately, that was all that mattered. In the weeks following the corporate dinner, Eliza and James settled into a rhythm that blended their worlds with surprising ease. Weekday evenings often found James at Eliza's apartment, his laptop open as he finished urgent emails while she prepared simple meals in her tiny kitchen. Weekends might include a fundraising event from his world or a trip to the farmer's market from hers. They were building a shared life, piece by careful piece. Eliza's position at West Hill Academy had expanded beyond its initial scope, her innovative literacy program gaining attention not just within the school but in wider educational circles. Meanwhile, she maintained her role at the public library, refusing to abandon the community she had served for years despite the increasing demands on her time. The media interest in their relationship had faded to a manageable level. Occasional photographs when they attended public events, the odd reference in business profiles of James, but nothing that disrupted their daily lives. Eliza had even developed a cordial relationship with James's PR team, who appreciated her discretion and natural dignity. On this particular Sunday morning, they were enjoying a rare lazy day at James's penthouse apartment, a space Eliza had initially found intimidating with its floor-to-ceiling windows, museum-quality art, and cutting-edge technology that controlled everything from lighting to temperature with voice commands. Over time, however, she had begun to leave her mark on the sterile perfection. A throw blanket here, a stack of books there, small touches that made the space feel more lived in. James was reading the Sunday paper while Eliza finished her second cup of coffee, her legs tucked beneath her on the plush sofa. The domesticity of the moment struck her suddenly, how comfortable they had become in each other's spaces, how natural it felt to wake up beside him to share these quiet moments. "You're staring," James observed without looking up from his paper, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Just appreciating the view," Eliza replied lightly. James set down the financial section, his expression turning more serious. "I've been thinking," he began, reaching for her hand. "You've been spending more and more time here. Half your wardrobe has migrated to my closet. Your favorite books are on my shelves." Eliza's heart skipped a beat, sensing where this conversation was heading. "That's true," she acknowledged cautiously. "What would you think about making it official? Moving in together?" James asked, his tone casual though his eyes revealed the importance of the question. This place is certainly big enough for both of us, and the commute to both the library and West Hill would be manageable. The prospect was both thrilling and daunting. Living together would be a significant step forward in their relationship, yet it would also mean leaving the apartment that had been her sanctuary after Michael's death, the space where she had rebuilt her life and found her independence. "I'm not suggesting you give up your apartment right away," James added, accurately reading her hesitation. "You could keep it for as long as you need, use it as an office or just a place to retreat when you need space." His consideration touched her deeply. "You'd be okay with that arrangement? It seems unnecessarily complicated." James shrugged, squeezing her hand gently. "What's important to me is that you feel secure, never trapped. I want you to move in because you want to share your life with me, not because it's more convenient or economical." "When you put it that way," Eliza said with a smile, "it's hard to say no." She leaned forward to kiss him softly. "Let me think about the logistics, but yes, I'd like to move in with you." James's face broke into a radiant smile, the kind that still made her heart flutter after months together. "Really? You're sure?" "I'm sure that I love you," Eliza said, cupping his face with her palm, "and I'm sure that I want to build a life with you. The details are just details." Their celebratory mood was interrupted by the insistent buzz of James's phone. He glanced at the screen with a frown. "It's Alexander. On a Sunday morning, it must be important." "V?" he answered with a terse, "What's happened?" Eliza watched as his expression transformed from mild annoyance to intense concentration. She could hear only James's side of the conversation, terse questions, muttered expletives, rapid-fire instructions. When he finally ended the call, his face was grim. "There's a situation with the London expansion. A key investor has pulled out unexpectedly, and there are rumors of regulatory issues we weren't aware of. I need to go into the office." "Of course," Eliza said, already rising to clear their coffee cups. "Do what you need to do." James stood, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration she had come to recognize. "I'm sorry about this. I know we had plans for the day." "Plans can be rescheduled," Eliza assured him. "This sounds serious." "It is," James confirmed. "Potentially very serious. This expansion is crucial for our European strategy. If it falls apart..." He trailed off, already mentally shifting into crisis management mode. "Then you should focus on preventing that," Eliza said practically. "I'll head home, catch up on some work myself." James looked momentarily torn, then nodded. "I'll have Richard drive you, and I'll call as soon as I have a better handle on the situation." Within 30 minutes, James had transformed from the relaxed man reading the Sunday paper to the focused CEO, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his expression set in determined lines as he spoke rapidly on his phone while escorting Eliza to the waiting car. "I love you," he said, kissing her quickly before helping her into the vehicle. "And I promise I'll make this up to you." "There's nothing to make up," Eliza replied. "Go save your expansion. I'll be here when you're done." As Richard drove her back to her apartment, Eliza reflected on the sudden shift in their day. This was the reality of loving someone in James's position. Crises didn't respect weekends or personal plans. She understood that, accepted it as part of the package. Yet she couldn't help feeling a twinge of something like loneliness at how quickly their intimate morning had been replaced by corporate urgency. The London crisis proved more severe than initially thought. What was supposed to be a few hours of James's Sunday expanded into days of intense negotiations, emergency board meetings, and sleepless nights. Eliza saw him only in brief intervals, late-night visits where he was too exhausted for real conversation, early morning coffees before he rushed back to the office. On the fourth day of the crisis, Eliza was at West Hill Academy, meeting with teachers about implementing the next phase of her literacy program when her phone vibrated with a text from James. "Need to fly to London tonight. Regulatory situation requires in-person handling. Will call when I can. I'm so sorry." Eliza stared at the message, a hollow feeling settling in her stomach. It wasn't the trip itself that bothered her. She understood the necessity, but the growing distance she felt, not just physically, but emotionally. James had been so consumed by the crisis that they'd barely spoken about anything meaningful in days, certainly not about their plans to move in together or anything beyond the immediate business emergency. "Everything all right?" asked Dr. Winters, noticing Eliza's distraction. "Just a change of plans," Eliza replied, tucking her phone away. "Where were we?" She focused on the meeting with professional determination, but part of her mind remained on James, flying across an ocean, pulled further into a world where she had no place, no role to play. That evening, alone in her apartment, Eliza tried to lose herself in a book, but the words refused to hold her attention. The phone call she had been hoping for came just after midnight, James's voice sounding tired but resolute. "I've just landed," he said. "It's absolute chaos here. The Regulatory Commission has concerns about market monopoly, and our primary UK investor is getting cold feet because of Brexit uncertainties." "How long do you think you'll need to stay?" Eliza asked, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about," James said hesitantly. "This isn't going to be resolved quickly. I'm looking at 2 weeks minimum, possibly longer." "I see," Eliza said, trying to keep disappointment from coloring her tone. "Well, you'll do what needs to be done. That's who you are." There was a pause on the line. "I was hoping you might consider joining me," James said finally. "Not right away. I'll be in meetings constantly for the first week. But after that, London is beautiful in the fall. We could have some time together in between my obligations." The invitation surprised her. "What about my work? The library? West Hill?" "It would just be for a week or so," James said. "Surely they could manage without you for that long? I've already checked with Margaret about arranging the flights, accommodations. All you'd need to do is say yes." Eliza felt a flicker of irritation at his presumption, coupled with guilt for feeling that way when he was clearly trying to include her. "I'd need to think about it. Check with my supervisors. It's not as simple as just deciding to take off for a week." "Of course," James said quickly. "I understand. It was just a thought. I miss you already, and I've only been gone a few hours." Her irritation softened at the genuine longing in his voice. "I miss you too," she admitted. "Let me see what I can arrange." They spoke for a few minutes more before James had to go, another crisis meeting before he could even check into his hotel. After they disconnected, Eliza sat in the quiet of her apartment, torn between competing emotions. On one hand, the idea of joining James in London was thrilling, her first trip abroad, a chance to see a city she had only read about. On the other hand, she felt uncomfortably like an afterthought, invited only after the important business was handled, expected to rearrange her life and obligations around his schedule. She was still mulling over these thoughts the next day at the library when Martha found her reorganizing the children's section with unusual intensity. "You're shelving those picture books like they've personally offended you," Martha observed dryly. "Want to talk about it?" Eliza sighed, setting down the stack of books. "James is in London dealing with a business crisis. He's asked me to join him there next week." "That sounds wonderful," Martha said, though her expression suggested she sensed complications. But he just assumed I could rearrange my life on a moment's notice, that my work, my commitments aren't as binding or important as his." The words came out in a rush, revealing the heart of her frustration. Martha considered this thoughtfully. "Did he actually say that?" "No," Eliza admitted. "He was very sweet about it, actually. Said he missed me." "And do you want to go? Setting aside the logistical challenges?" "Of course I do," Eliza said without hesitation. "I've never been to London, and I miss him too. It's just that you're afraid of setting a precedent," Martha finished for her. "That if you drop everything this time, it becomes the expectation." "Exactly," Eliza said, relieved that her friend understood. "I want to be supportive, but I also need him to understand that my work matters too. even if it doesn't involve billion-dollar deals." Martha nodded wisely. "Then tell him that. And for what it's worth, I think you should go. The children's section will survive without you for a week, and so will those privileged kids at West Hill. But relationships need nurturing, especially long-distance ones, even temporarily." Eliza smiled gratefully at her friend's perspective. "When did you get so wise about relationships?" 43 years of marriage, dear," Martha replied with a twinkle in her eye. "You learn a thing or two about compromise and priorities." That evening, Eliza called James, catching him as he was finishing another marathon day of negotiations. "I've arranged things at work," she told him. "I can come next week, from Tuesday to Sunday." "That's wonderful," James said, his voice warming with genuine pleasure. "I've been dealing with the most insufferable bureaucrats all day, and this is the first good news I've had." "There's something I need to say, though," Eliza continued, determined to express her earlier misgivings. "I want to support you, James. I want to be there for the important moments, good and bad. But I need you to remember that my work is important too. Not on the same scale as yours, perhaps, but significant to me and to the people I serve." There was a brief silence on the line. "You're absolutely right," James said finally, his tone contrite. "I was presumptuous, and I apologize. Your work is important, and I should have approached this as a conversation, not a foregone conclusion." His willingness to acknowledge her concern without defensiveness reaffirmed what Eliza loved about him. "Thank you for understanding," she said softly. "Now tell me what I should pack for London in the fall." The conversation shifted to lighter topics: weather forecasts, tourist attractions they might visit, the elegant hotel suite James had arranged. By the time they said goodnight, Eliza felt more settled, more confident in their ability to navigate the complexities of their different worlds and responsibilities. As she began to prepare for her first international trip, pulling her rarely used suitcase from the back of her closet, Eliza reflected on how far she had come from the widow standing at a rainy bus stop just months earlier. Life had taken an unexpected turn, bringing challenges she never anticipated, but also joy she had thought might never return after Michael's death. Whatever awaited her in London, whatever awaited them as a couple navigating these uncharted waters, she would face it with an open heart and clear eyes, determined to find that elusive balance between supporting James's dreams and honoring her own. The private jet was nothing short of luxurious, with buttery leather seats, polished wood accents, and a flight attendant who treated Eliza like visiting royalty. Despite James's assurance that this was simply the most practical way to get her to London, the company plane was already making the trip to bring over additional executives. Eliza couldn't help feeling like an imposter in this rarefied world of extreme privilege. "Ms. Parker, we'll be landing at Heathrow in approximately 30 minutes, the attendant informed her with a warm smile. "Mr. Harrington has arranged for a car to meet you at the private terminal." "Thank you," Eliza replied, setting aside the novel she'd been attempting to read. Her mind was too full of competing emotions to focus on fictional characters. Excitement at seeing James after a week apart. Anxiety about navigating yet another aspect of his world that was completely foreign to her. Lingering concern about how easily her professional responsibilities had been set aside to accommodate his needs. The London sky was overcast as the plane began its descent, the sprawling city gradually coming into view. Eliza pressed her face to the window like an eager child, taking in the serpentine curve of the Thames, the iconic silhouettes of Parliament and the London Eye, the patchwork of historic and modern architecture that made up the cityscape. She had dreamed of visiting London since she was a girl devouring British classics, Dickens, Austen, the Brontes, and now here she was, arriving in a private jet to visit her billionaire boyfriend. The absurdity of it made her chuckle softly to herself. What would Michael have made of all this? He would have been amused, she thought, and perhaps a bit skeptical. But ultimately, he would have wanted her happiness above all else. True to the attendant's word, a sleek black car was waiting on the tarmac. The driver, a dignified older gentleman with a crisp British accent, greeted her by name and efficiently handled her modest luggage before holding the door for her. "Mr. Harrington sends his apologies, Ms. Parker," he explained as they pulled away from the airport. "He's been detained in meetings but hopes to join you at the hotel by 7 this evening. He's asked me to give you a brief tour of the city if you're not too tired from your journey." "That's very thoughtful," Eliza said, masking her disappointment. She had hoped James might meet her at the airport, but of course the business crisis took precedence. A tour would be lovely. For the next hour, the driver, who introduced himself as Edwin, provided a running commentary as they passed London's major landmarks. Eliza absorbed it all with genuine wonder, temporarily setting aside her conflicted feelings in the face of such a magnificent city steeped in the literary history she loved. The hotel, when they finally arrived, was the epitome of old-world luxury, a historic building in Mayfair with a uniformed doorman and a marble-floored lobby adorned with fresh flower arrangements taller than Eliza herself. The staff treated her with a deference that made her self-conscious, addressing her as Ms. Parker with the utmost respect while escorting her to a suite that was larger than her entire apartment back home. "Mr. Harrington specifically requested this suite for you," the concierge explained as he opened the door to reveal a spacious living area with ornate moldings, antique furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a lush private garden. "It's one of our most requested accommodations, particularly favored by guests who appreciate privacy and a view of the gardens rather than the street." "It's beautiful," Eliza said truthfully, though she was slightly overwhelmed by the opulence. "Your luggage will be brought up immediately," the concierge continued. "Mr. Harrington has arranged for dinner to be served in the suite at 8, should his meetings run late. Is there anything else you require?" "No, thank you. This is more than sufficient." Left alone, Eliza wandered through the suite, taking in the elegant bedroom with its canopied king-size bed, the marble bathroom with a soaking tub that could comfortably fit two, the small study equipped with a writing desk positioned to capture the garden view. On the desk, she found a handwritten note in James's distinctive script. "Eliza, my love, I'm counting the minutes until I can see you. London has been a battleground this past week, but having you here will make it infinitely more bearable. I've arranged for a few surprises during your stay. The first should arrive shortly after you do. All my love, James." As if on cue, there was a gentle knock at the door. When Eliza opened it, she found a hotel staff member holding a large, flat box tied with a silk ribbon and another bearing an arrangement of roses in a shade of deep copper that matched her hair perfectly. "Delivery for Ms. Parker," the first attendant announced, presenting the box with white-gloved hands. Eliza accepted both gifts, thanking the staff before closing the door. Setting the flowers on a side table, she carefully untied the ribbon on the box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was an elegant evening gown in a shade of deep blue that reminded her of the night sky. Along with it was a smaller box containing a delicate silver necklace set with what appeared to be actual sapphires. Another note in James's handwriting read simply, "For tomorrow night's gala at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Only if you feel comfortable. No pressure." Eliza sat down on the edge of the bed, the gown spread across her lap, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. The gifts were undeniably thoughtful and beautiful. James had even remembered her mentioning once that deep blue was her favorite color for formal wear. Yet she couldn't help feeling a twinge of discomfort at the extravagance, the presumption that she would need a new gown rather than anything she might have packed herself. She was still contemplating this when her phone rang, James calling via video. "You've arrived safely," he said when she answered, his face appearing on her screen. He looked tired, with faint shadows under his eyes, but his smile was genuine. "How was the flight?" "Surreal," Eliza admitted with a small laugh. I've never experienced anything like it. And the suite? Is it to your liking? It's absolutely beautiful, James. Everything is, including the dress and necklace. His expression grew slightly uncertain. Is that a but I hear in your voice? Eliza hesitated, not wanting to seem ungrateful but determined to be honest. I could have brought something from home. You didn't need to go to the expense. But I wanted to, James said simply. Tomorrow's gala is important. Potential investors, key political figures. I wanted you to feel completely confident, to have something new for the occasion. But if it makes you uncomfortable, it's not that, Eliza interrupted, searching for the right words. The dress is beautiful, truly. It's just that sometimes these gestures, however well-intentioned, highlight the differences in our situations. You can buy a designer gown and sapphires on a whim. That's a world away from anything I've ever known. James was quiet for a moment, considering her words. I understand, he said finally. And I'm sorry if it feels overwhelming. I just want to share what I have with you, Eliza. But I should be more mindful of how these gestures might come across. His willingness to understand rather than be defensive eased her discomfort. When will I see you? She asked, changing the subject. I'm finishing up here, he promised. 1 hour, 2 at most. We'll have dinner in the suite, just the two of us. I've missed you terribly. I've missed you too, Eliza replied, realizing how true it was despite her complicated feelings. I'll be here. When James finally arrived at the suite nearly 3 hours later, the strain of the week was evident in his posture and the tight lines around his eyes. But the moment he saw Eliza, a transformation came over him. His shoulders relaxed, his expression softened, as if her presence alone was a balm to his exhaustion. I was beginning to think you'd stood me up, Eliza teased gently, as he pulled her into an embrace. Never, James murmured against her hair. Though these regulatory officials nearly managed it, I had to threaten to walk away from the entire deal before they would end today's session. They ate dinner by the fireplace, James gradually unwinding as he shared the complex details of the regulatory hurdles and investor concerns that had consumed his week. Eliza listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that surprised him with their insight. You've been paying attention to the business sections, he observed with a pleased smile. Eliza shrugged, feeling a small glow of pride. I wanted to understand what you're dealing with. It sounds incredibly complex. It is, James agreed, but having you here makes it bearable. He reached across the table to take her hand. I'm sorry about earlier, about the dress. I never want my gifts to make you uncomfortable. I know, Eliza assured him, and it really is beautiful. I was just finding my balance, I think. This whole experience is so far outside my normal life. But that's just it, James said earnestly. I don't want this to be outside your life. I want it to be part of your life, our life together. The travel, the events, even the business crises. Just as the library and your work at West Hill are part of my life now because they matter to you. His words touched her deeply, articulating exactly what she had been struggling with, not the differences in their worlds, but how to integrate them into a shared existence. I want that too, she said softly. The following evening found them at the Victoria and Albert Museum Gala, an event combining James's business interests with London's cultural elite. Eliza wore the blue gown which fit as if it had been made for her, and the sapphire necklace that caught the light with every movement. Despite her initial reservations, she had to admit that the outfit gave her a confidence she might not have felt in anything she had brought from home. The museum had been transformed for the event, its grand halls illuminated with tasteful lighting that highlighted the magnificent architecture and collections. As James escorted her from exhibit to exhibit, introducing her to a dizzying array of business associates, politicians, and cultural figures, Eliza found herself drawing on all the skills she had developed during their months together. You're a natural at this, James whispered during a brief moment alone between introductions. "Everyone is charmed by you." "I'm just being myself," Eliza replied, though she felt a quiet pride in her ability to navigate this sophisticated gathering without feeling completely out of place. "Exactly," James said with a warm smile. "That's what makes you exceptional." The evening was progressing smoothly until Eliza found herself momentarily separated from James, who had been pulled into an urgent conversation with a key investor. Standing near a display of Renaissance sculptures, she was admiring the craftsmanship when she overheard a conversation from a nearby group that caught her attention. "Harrington's librarian seems to be adapting well to her new circumstances," a woman's voice said with a hint of amusement. "I must say I didn't give the relationship 6 months when I first read about it." "She certainly made an effort with her appearance," another voice replied, "though I understand it's all James's doing. The wardrobe, the jewelry, quite the Pygmalion project. The question is whether it's just a phase," a male voice joined in. "James has always had a soft spot for charity cases. Remember that environmental activist he was so taken with a few years ago? This feels similar. His attempt to prove he hasn't lost touch with real people despite his wealth." Eliza stood frozen, the words cutting deeper than she wanted to admit. She had known there would be those who viewed her this way, as a curiosity, a temporary diversion, a project for James. But hearing it stated so baldly, with such casual cruelty, was still a shock. "Ah, there you are." She turned to find Charlotte approaching, elegant in a striking red gown. From the tight set of Charlotte's jaw, Eliza knew immediately that she too had overheard the conversation. "I've been looking everywhere for you," Charlotte continued loudly enough for the gossiping group to hear. "James is about to give his address and he wanted you by his side." As Charlotte guided her away, Eliza fought to maintain her composure. "How much did you hear?" she asked quietly. "Enough to want to pour my champagne over their designer clothes," Charlotte replied grimly. "Ignore them, Eliza. They're bitter, irrelevant people who can't stand seeing James genuinely happy with someone who isn't from their toxic little circle." "But what if they're right?" Eliza couldn't help asking. "What if this is just a phase for him? A Pygmalion project that he'll eventually tire of?" Charlotte stopped walking, turning to face Eliza directly. "I've known James for over 20 years, she said firmly. "I've seen him with society women, with models, with corporate climbers. I have never, not once, seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Like you're the sun and he's been living in darkness." The sincerity in Charlotte's eyes was impossible to doubt, and Eliza felt her spirits lift slightly. "Thank you for that," she said. "And for the rescue." "That's what friends are for," Charlotte replied with a squeeze of her arm. "Now, let's get you to James. He really is about to speak, and he'll want you there." As they moved through the crowded museum halls, Eliza wrestled with the lingering impact of the overhead conversation. She had come so far in adapting to James's world, in finding her place within it while maintaining her own identity. But perhaps the greatest challenge wasn't the practical differences in their lives or even the public scrutiny. It was believing, truly believing, that she belonged at his side not despite their differences but because of the unique perspective and values she brought to his life. By the time they reached the central hall where James was preparing to address the gathering, Eliza had composed herself outwardly. But inside, new doubts had taken root, ones that would require more than Charlotte's reassurances to fully dispel. James's speech to the gathered elite was masterful, confident without arrogance, passionate about the cultural importance of institutions like the Victoria and Albert Museum, while deftly weaving in references to the business opportunities his company's London expansion would create. Throughout his address, his gaze frequently found Eliza in the crowd as if drawing strength from her presence. To the outside observer, she appeared the perfect supportive partner, smiling attentively, applauding at the right moments. But inside, the overheard conversation churned like acid in her stomach. Charity case, Pygmalion Project. Just a phase. The words overlaid every interaction for the remainder of the evening, causing her to scrutinize each glance, each whispered comment, looking for confirmation that others viewed her the same way. James sensed something was wrong during the car ride back to the hotel. "You've gone quiet," he observed, reaching for her hand in the darkness. "Was it too overwhelming? I know these events can be exhausting." "It was fine," Eliza replied, summoning a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just tired from all the socializing. You were wonderful up there." "Because you were there," he said, squeezing her hand. "Having you in the room makes all the difference." His sincerity only deepened her disquiet. Did he truly not see the incongruity of their relationship, or was he, as those cruel voices suggested, simply enjoying the novelty of transforming an ordinary librarian into someone who could move in his world? Back in their suite, as James loosened his tie and described the progress made with key investors during the gala, Eliza found herself standing before the ornate mirror in the bedroom, studying her reflection. The elegant gown, the sapphire necklace, the sophisticated updo Charlotte's stylist had created for her, they were like a costume she had donned for a play, a character she was portraying rather than her true self. "Eliza?" James appeared in the doorway, his expression concerned. "What's going on? You've barely said a word since we left the museum." She turned to face him, suddenly finding it impossible to maintain the pretense of everything being fine. "I overheard some people talking about us tonight," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "About me, specifically." James's expression darkened immediately. "What did they say?" "That I'm your charity case, your Pygmalion Project." She swallowed hard. "That I'm just a phase you're going through to prove you haven't lost touch with real people." "Who said this?" James demanded, anger flashing in his eyes. "I want names." "It doesn't matter who," Eliza replied, removing the sapphire necklace and setting it carefully on the dresser. "What matters is that it made me realize something. Tonight, in that gown, with these jewels, surrounded by the elite of London society, I felt like I was playing a part, not being myself." "That's ridiculous," James protested. "You were completely authentic, completely yourself." "Was I?" Eliza challenged gently. "Or have I just gotten better at adapting to your world, at pretending I belong in it?" James approached her slowly, as if afraid she might retreat. "You do belong in it. With me." "But on whose terms?" Eliza persisted. "Look at us, James. Look at this suite, the private jet, the gala, the dress you bought because whatever I brought from home wouldn't have been good enough for your world. That's not why—" "Maybe not consciously," she acknowledged. "But the reality is, in your world, I need to be upgraded, transformed. And perhaps that's been exciting for you, introducing me to all these new experiences, watching me adapt. But at what point do I stop being the woman you fell in love with and become just another fixture in your elite lifestyle?" James was silent for a long moment, his expression shifting from defensive to thoughtful. "I never meant to make you feel that way," he said finally. "All I've wanted is to share my life with you. But I can see now how it might have seemed unbalanced." He sat on the edge of the bed, gesturing for her to join him. When she did, albeit with some hesitation, he took her hands in his. "When I saw you on that bus, giving up your seat without a second thought, what struck me wasn't that you were someone I could transform or upgrade. It was that you possessed something genuine that all the wealth and privilege in my world couldn't create. True kindness, without expectation of reward." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms as he continued, "I didn't fall in love with you because you were different from the women in my world, though you are, refreshingly so. I fell in love with you because you reminded me of who I wanted to be. Someone whose actions align with their values, someone who finds joy in simple goodness rather than extravagance or status." Eliza felt tears gathering in her eyes. "But those people tonight, Those people, James interrupted firmly, are exactly the reason I was so drawn to you in the first place. Their world is built on appearances, on transactions disguised as relationships. They can't understand what we have because they've never experienced it. They reduce it to the only terms they comprehend: charity, projects, phases. Their inability to understand us says everything about them and nothing about us. His words penetrated the cloud of doubt that had enveloped her since the gala. "I want to believe that," she whispered. "Then let me show you something," James said, standing and extending his hand. "There's a reason I chose this hotel, this particular suite. It wasn't just for the luxury or the privacy." Curious despite her emotional turmoil, Eliza allowed him to lead her to the writing desk by the window. He opened the drawer and removed what appeared to be an old, leather-bound journal. "This was my mother's," he explained, handling it with reverence. "She never had much, worked 3 jobs to support us after my father left, but she loved books, loved stories, saved for months to take a trip to London when I was 10 years old." He opened the journal carefully to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "We stayed in a small bed and breakfast not far from here, but she brought me to this hotel one afternoon. We sat in the garden just below these windows, and she let me order hot chocolate from a waiter who treated us like royalty, even though he must have known we didn't belong." James turned the journal so Eliza could see the entry, written in neat, careful handwriting. "Today, I showed James what's possible. We sat in the garden of the most beautiful hotel in London, and for 1 hour, we belonged there. He promised me that someday he would bring me back as a real guest. I don't need that to happen, but I love that he believes it could. She died before I could fulfill that promise," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I booked this suite, I wasn't thinking about impressing you with luxury. I was thinking about that day in the garden with my mother, about how she taught me to believe I could bridge worlds." Eliza felt her perspective shifting as she looked at James with new understanding. His wealth and status weren't simply privileges he had always enjoyed, but achievements hard-won from humble beginnings. His desire to share them with her wasn't about transformation or charity, but about creating a shared life that honored both their pasts while building something new together. "I've been so focused on our differences," she admitted, "on fitting into your world or maintaining my own. I didn't consider that perhaps what we're doing is creating a new world altogether, one that belongs only to us." "That's exactly it," James said, relief evident in his voice. "I don't want you to become someone else to fit into my life. I want us to build a life that reflects the best of both of us." "But how do we do that practically?" Eliza asked. "Your responsibilities, your position, they come with certain expectations, certain demands." "We meet them on our own terms," James replied with conviction. "Yes, there will be galas and corporate dinners, but there will also be quiet evenings at your apartment, weekends at the library, moments that matter to you. And when people like those at the museum tonight try to make you feel less than, we'll know the truth, that you belong exactly where you choose to be, not where anyone else thinks you should be." Eliza felt the weight that had been pressing on her heart begin to lift. "I love you," she said simply. "Not the CEO or the billionaire, just you, the man who quotes Jane Austen and carries his mother's journal across oceans." "And I love you," James replied, drawing her into his arms. "Not because you can adapt to my world, but because you've created a place for me in yours. A place where I'm valued for who I am, not what I own or what I've achieved." He held her close for a long moment, then pulled back slightly, a new light in his eyes. "I have an idea," he said. "Let's get out of here." "Now?" Eliza asked, surprised. "It's nearly midnight." "Exactly," James grinned. "The perfect time for an adventure, something entirely ours, not dictated by business obligations or social expectations." 20 minutes later, having changed into jeans and sweaters, they slipped out of the hotel through a side entrance to avoid the paparazzi who occasionally lingered near the main doors. James led Eliza through the quieter streets of nighttime London, eventually arriving at a secluded spot along the Thames where the city lights danced on the dark water. "I used to come here during university," he explained, "when the pressure of straddling two worlds became too much, the scholarship student trying to fit in with the children of privilege. This spot always reminded me that beneath all the social divisions, we're all just people, living alongside the same river that's flowed through this city for centuries." As they stood together by the water, Eliza felt a profound sense of rightness, of balance restored. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said, "for sharing this piece of your past." "Thank you for reminding me what really matters," James replied, "for seeing beyond the CEO to the person underneath." 6 months later, they stood in this same spot at dawn, alone except for Harold, who had flown in specially for the occasion. The elderly man from the bus had become a dear friend, a regular guest at their dinner table, and now, with a special license obtained through James's connections, the officiant at their intimate wedding ceremony. "Who would have thought," Harold chuckled as he prepared to begin the service, "that giving up a seat on the bus would lead to all this?" Eliza, radiant in a simple white dress that was entirely her own choice, glanced at James with love that had only deepened through the challenges they had faced together. They had found their balance over the intervening months, a life divided between his penthouse and her apartment, which she had insisted on keeping as a place where neighborhood children could come for additional reading help, between gallery openings and story time at the library, between board meetings and quiet evenings with books. There had been more moments of doubt, more instances where their different backgrounds created friction or misunderstanding, but each time they had returned to the fundamental truth that had brought them together, that beneath the surface differences of wealth and status, they shared the same core values, the same vision of a life built on kindness, integrity, and genuine connection. "When I met you on that bus," James said as they exchanged vows of their own writing, "I was searching for someone who would see me, not my position or my wealth. What I found was so much more, someone who would challenge me to be better, who would remind me daily of what truly matters in this world." "When I gave up my seat that rainy day," Eliza responded, her voice steady despite the emotion welling in her chest, "I was simply doing what felt right in the moment. I had no idea that simple act would lead me to you, to a love that honors who I've been while embracing who we can become together." As the sun rose fully over the Thames, casting a golden light on the city they had both come to love, Harold pronounced them husband and wife. James kissed Eliza with a tenderness that spoke of promises kept and adventures yet to come, of two different worlds that had found a way to become one shared life. Later, at a celebration that seamlessly blended elegance with warmth, bringing together corporate executives and library volunteers, childhood friends and new allies, James raised a toast to his bride. "To Eliza," he said, his eyes never leaving hers, "who taught me that the most important seat anyone can offer is the one beside them for the journey ahead." In that moment, surrounded by the community they had built together, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place, not in James's world or even in her own, but in the beautiful, complex, sometimes challenging space they had created between the two. A space where a CEO and a librarian could be simply two people who loved each other completely, for exactly who they were. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.